Chapter 2607. Extreme Ice Demonic Seal. Nie Tian immediately recognized the scream as Huang Fu Hong's voice. Hong. Another panicked voice was heard. It was none other than Huang Fu Zhangsheng. Quick, let's go take a look. Nie Tian and Qijua Sword Master exchanged glances, and reacted at the same time. The two of them rushed into the room. The moment the door opened, an incomparably sharp sword intent gushed out, chilling to the bone. Nie Tian did not bother too much as he stepped into the room. He was stunned by the scene he saw after entering the room. Huang Fu Hong was sitting cross-legged on the ground with the extreme ice sword intent surging around him. He had lost control of his body, causing him to freeze. Nie Tian's face sank when he sensed Huang Fu Hong's aura weakening. He glanced at Huang Fu Zhangsheng and asked, "What's going on?" Hong Er's extreme ice demonic seal in his body is out of control. Huang Fu Zhangsheng's face was filled with panic. Extreme ice demonic seal? Nie Tian was startled. He immediately sensed Huang Fu Hong and exclaimed, "It's the power of the bloodline." Huang Fu Zhangsheng nodded his head and said, "The extreme ice demonic seal is the bloodline power of our Huang Fu clan. It's a powerful ice attribute seal. The power of the bloodline seal is extremely beneficial to the cultivators of the Huang Fu clan. However, Hong Er's extreme ice demonic seal has been different from the others since he was born. The power within the seal is extremely powerful. It should have reached the legendary 10,000 layer seal." Nie Tian frowned when he heard Huang Fu Zhangsheng's words. He was confused as to what the 10,000 layer seal meant. The extreme ice demonic seal is divided into 1 layer, 10 layers, 100 layers, 1,000 layers, and 10,000 layers. Huang Fu Zhangsheng explained, in the history of the Huang Fu clan, only the founder of the Ice Tower, who was also the first Ice Tower master, possessed the 10,000 layer seal. Although the 10,000 layer extreme ice demonic seal is stronger than the lower layer extreme ice demonic seal, it will also place a great burden on the martial artist's martial body. Ever since Hong Er was 10 years old, the extreme ice devil seal in his body would act up once every 10 years. Previously, when he acted up, I used my extreme ice devil seal to help him suppress it. However, he is too strong now. My Supreme Ice Devil Seal can no longer suppress the 10,000 layers of Supreme Ice Devil Seal in his body. Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed as he finally understood. Within Huang Fu Hong's body, there was a powerful bloodline seal. And now, this bloodline seal could no longer be suppressed. Nie Tian became cold and asked Huang Fu Zhangsheng, "Tower Lord, what happens if the extreme ice demonic seal can't be suppressed?" Hong Er, he will die. Huang Fu Zhangsheng's beautiful eyes trembled. She was obviously very frightened. Nie Tian furrowed his brows, and his face was filled with shock as well. Nie Tian, let's put Huang Fu boy into the 9 extremities first. At this moment, Fat Cat's nervous voice sounded. All right. Nie Tian's eyes lit up when he heard Fat Cat's words. He then said to Huang Fu Zhangsheng, "Tower Lord, I'll put Huang Fu Hong into another space first. I have a friend with me who should be able to save him." Yes. Huang Fu Zhangsheng nodded repeatedly and looked at Nie Tian gratefully. Then, Nie Tian took out the 9 extremities and put Huang Fu Hong into it. "Nie Tian, you and that stick come in too." Fat Cat's voice sounded again. All right. Nie Tian agreed and said to Qijua Sword Saint, "Lord Sword Saint, let's go in too." Qijua Sword Saint was stunned. He couldn't help but turn to look at Huang Fu Zhangsheng. The latter's beautiful eyes were filled with tears, which made his heart tremble. He immediately nodded and went into the 9 extremities. In the 9 extremities, Nie Tian and Qijua Sword Saint stood beside Huang Fu Hong. Qijua Sword Saint looked at the world of ice in front of him and was stunned. He couldn't react for a long time. He never thought that Nie Tian would have such a heaven-defying thing in his hands. Where's your friend?" Chijua's sword saint looked at Nie Tian and asked in surprise. I'm here. Just at that moment, little fat cat's voice rang out and appeared. There was no panic on the cat's face, but excitement. A fat cat? Sword Saint Sevenju was taken aback when he saw the little fat cat and let out a strange cry. The friend that Nie Tian mentioned turned out to be a cat, and a fat cat at that. Stick, watch your mouth. Fat cat rolled its eyes at Chijua Sword Saint and said, I'm a chinchilla, not a fat cat. Chijua Sword Saint was stunned. He didn't expect Fat Cat to have such a bad temper. Fat, hurry up and take a look at Huang Fuhong, urged Nie Tian anxiously. Don't worry, I already know how to save this kid. Fat Cat wasn't anxious at all. Instead, it smiled proudly and said, This kid is really lucky. He's going to get a blessing in disguise this time. A blessing in disguise? Nie Tian went blank for a moment, confusion filling his face. Nie Tian, go to the mystical ice formation and get a frost dragon ball, Fat Cat said to Nie Tian without explaining anything. Okay. Nie Tian didn't ask anything else. He moved and went to get the frost dragon ball. After a while, Nie Tian returned with a ball of ice in his palm. It was the frost dragon ball. The frost dragon ball was formed by the dragon soul and dragon chi in the frost dragon's body. It contained extremely terrifying frost power. Emo had absorbed a frost dragon pearl before he began to grow his second pair of demonic frost wings. Fat. Nie Tian handed the frost dragon ball to Fat Cat. He was puzzled and didn't know what Fat Cat was going to do. Little Fat Cat took the frost dragon pearl, but turned to look at Sword Saint Chijua and said with a chuckle, Ma Ba, whether we can succeed or not depends on you. My name is Chijua Sword Saint, not Stick. Chijua Sword Saint retorted angrily. It doesn't matter. Fat Cat laughed and began to release glazed chi from its body. It instantly wrapped around Huang Fuhong. After a while, a formation was formed. Huang Fuhong was in the center of the formation. Sorry, the other formation is prepared for you. Go, Fat Cat said to Chijua Sword Saint after setting up the formation. Chijua Sword Saint was stunned and hesitated whether he should go or not. Stick, do you want to spend the rest of your life alone? Fat Cat frowned and said, This kid is the precious nephew of your sweetheart. If you don't help him, your sweetheart will hate you for the rest of her life. I gave you a chance to show off. Why didn't you cherish it? Chijua Sword Saint was stunned. He didn't expect Fat Cat to know everything. Okay. For the happiness of the rest of my life, I'll go all out. Chijua Sword Saint nodded and stepped into the formation. Fat Cat raised its paw and put the frost dragon ball into the formation. Then, it said to Nie Tian, inject a stream of divine demon power into the frost dragon ball to activate its frost power. Okay. Even though he didn't know what the fat little cat was going to do, Nie Tian had absolute trust in it. He took a step forward, and with a shake of his body, a stream of divine power flew into the frost dragon pearl. Boom! In the next instant, the frost dragon orb trembled violently, and an endless amount of frost energy surged out. Ah! The terrifying frost power surged toward Chijua Sword Saint. He was hit by the frost power and cried out in pain. Seeing this, Nie Tian's expression changed, and he was speechless. Ma Ba, now use your sword will to filter out the berserk frost energy, and then slowly inject the frost energy into your future nephew's body. Little Fat Cat chuckled and said with a smug look on its face. Chapter 2608. The tomb opens in the Nine Extremities world. Nie Tian stared blankly at the scene within the formation, speechless for a long time. He could now tell that the Fat Cat was using the power of the Frost Dragon Orb to suppress the Supreme Frost Seal in Huang Fuhong's body. However, the power of the Frost Dragon Orb was too violent, which was why the 7 ultimate swordsmen had to first endure the violent energy before injecting the pure frost energy into Huang Fuhong's body. Huang Fu Brat's martial body would undergo a qualitative change after absorbing the power of the Frost Dragon Orb, and he would no longer fear the Supreme Frost Seal. The fat cat smiled faintly and said confidently. Nie Tian nodded, finally understanding what the fat cat meant when she said that it was a blessing in disguise. It must be said that it was fortunate that Nie Tian had the Frost Dragon Orb, or Huang Fu Hong would have died without a doubt. Fat, will the Sword Lord be all right? Nie Tian could not help but ask worriedly when he saw the pained look on the Seven Ultimate Sword Lord's face. He had not known the Seven Ultimate Sword Lord for long, but he had a general feeling that the man was not an evil person, and could even be considered a good person from a certain point of view. Nie Tian would not feel comfortable if he had to hurt the Seven Ultimate Sword Lord after saving Huang Fu Hong. Do you like being followed? The fat cat rolled her eyes at Nie Tian and said irritably, wouldn't there be no one bothering you now that the stick is in trouble? Nie Tian did a double take, his eyes twitching as he asked in surprise, the Sword Lord wouldn't die, would he? I'm just messing with you. The fat cat laughed at the sight of Nie Tian's nervousness. That stick may not look like much, but he is still an ultra-divine swordsman and a demi-saint. How could he die so easily? Still, he would probably be weak for a few days after saving Huang Fu Brat. Nie Tian looked at the fat cat and breathed a deep sigh of relief. Fat cat, when will this formation end? Sword Master Chijue stared at Fat cat and shouted. What's the rush? Isn't this just the beginning? Fat cat chuckled, then turned to Nie Tian and said, let's go out and let the stick play with his future nephew. Nie Tian's face darkened, but he still smiled and said to Chijue Sword Sovereign, Lord Sword Sovereign, I'll leave first. Don't worry, I will definitely tell the Tower Master everything. Your punishment will not be in vain. After that, Nie Tian and Fat cat left the Nine Extremities. Nie Tian, how's Hong Er? Huang Fu Zhongxing was extremely anxious when he saw Nie Tian come out, and he hurriedly asked. Tower Master, don't worry. Huang Fu Hong is fine. Sword Sovereign is saving him. With a faint smile, Nie Tian explained the situation to Huang Fu Zhongxing, and praised Sword Patriarch Seven Swordsmen while he was at it. Huang Fu Zhongxing's reaction was very calm. As long as Hong Er is fine, that's good. Lips twitching, Nie Tian thought to himself, it seems Sword Sovereign's path to true love is going to be a long one. Because Huang Fu Zhongxing was worried about Huang Fu Hong's safety, he decided to go back to the Nine Extremities. As the day of the opening of the Ghost Emperor Necropolis drew closer, Nie Tian decided to focus on his cultivation and try to break through to the peak Paramount God level. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Nie Tian walked out of the room. His aura had become much stronger, and his aura had become much stronger. Although his injuries had been healed, he still hadn't broken through to the peak Paramount God level. At that moment, Nie Tian thought of Huang Fu Hong and asked with a frown, Little fatty, is Huang Fu Hong still not done? More than 10 days had passed, and Huang Fu Hong still hadn't finished absorbing the power of the frigid frost dragon pearls. He should be, Fat Cat said with a chuckle. Let's go take a look at the Nine Extremities. Yeah, Nie Tian said, then entered the Nine Extremities. Within the spell formation set up by Fat Cat, the frigid frost dragon pearls were on the verge of vanishing. However, Sword Master Chijue's expression was extremely ugly. His face was as pale as a sheet of paper, without any color of blood. Never in his wildest dreams could he have guessed that it would take him so long to enter the spell formation. Fat Cat had really screwed him over. Moments later, the last bit of the frigid frost dragon pearls vanished, and the spell formation came to a stop. Hong Er, Huang Fu Zhongxing said nervously, taking a step forward. Huang Fu Zhongxing rose to his feet, his aura surging, and he seemed much more powerful than before. I've broken through. He sensed his own aura, and his eyes suddenly trembled as he shouted in surprise. absorbing the power of the frigid frost dragon pearls, had elevated Huang Fu Hong's sword principal realm from the peak of sword martial unification to the legendary realm of sword martial unification. He was now a legendary swordsman. You've broken through. I've been through a lot. On the other side, Sword Master Chijue stood up. His skinny body had become even thinner, as if he could be blown away by a gust of wind. Master Sword Master, thank you for saving my life. Huang Fu Hong stepped forward and bowed deeply to Sword Master Chijue. You're welcome. It's nothing. Sword Master Chijue smiled awkwardly, but his small eyes were fixed on Huang Fu Zhongsheng. He stammered, Tower Master Huang Fu, I have something to. Thank you. Huang Fu Zhongsheng did not wait for him to finish and thanked him coldly. Sword Master Chijue's face stiffened, and he was petrified for a long time. Nie Tian patted Sword Master Chijue's shoulder and shook his head with a smile. Then, Nie Tian and the others left Juji. Sword Master Chijue was too weak, so he stayed in Juji to recover. This time, he was really inseparable from Nie Tian. After Nie Tian and the others left the room, they found Jun Aoqing and the others. At this time, Feng Qi also appeared. Nie Tian, the Ghost Emperor tomb is about to open. Let's go to Ghost Emperor Valley now. Feng Qi walked over and said happily. At this moment, he had completely recovered. Okay. Nie Tian nodded, then looked at Yenlingyun, who was behind Feng Qi, and asked, Senior Sword Sage is going to Ghost Emperor Valley too? Yenlingyun nodded and did not say anything else. Nie Tian was a little puzzled. Was an expert like Yenlingyun also going to enter Ghost Emperor tomb? He was very confused and was about to ask. Bang! However, at that instant, a loud explosion could be heard all of a sudden. The space shuddered violently, as if the entire inn was about to collapse. Yenlingyun's eyes glistened as he reacted. It's coming from the direction of Ghost Emperor Valley. The Ghost Emperor tomb is opening. At the same time, in a deep and serene canyon, a tremendous change that could shatter the heavens and the earth was happening. Roar! Crack! Crack! Violent sounds continuously rang out from beneath the ground. It was as if there was an enormous beast awakening beneath the ground. Bang! 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 A huge bump appeared on the ground, causing the ground to crack open and the rocks to shatter. It was a shocking sight, as if a pair of invisible hands were tearing the ground apart. Gradually, the cracks on the ground grew larger, as a bottomless abyss appeared on the ground. Bang! At that instant, the ground shook violently as a gigantic creature rose from the depths of the underground abyss. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, the ground began to shake even more violently, and one enormous creature after another appeared. Inside the valley, waves of dust rose into the sky, as rocks were sent flying in all directions, as if it was the end of the world. A while later, the dust in the valley dissipated, allowing the space to become clear. The most shocking scene took place. In the spacious valley, 9 doors made of huge rocks appeared, like 9 enormous beasts with their bloody mouths wide open, trying to devour everything. The 9 doors were like giants reaching the sky, each over 10,000 meters tall, giving them a terrifying appearance. The 9 giant gates were the legendary Ghost Emperor Gates. Chapter 2609. Ghost Emperor Crimson Hand. The 9 Ghost Emperor Gates were like giants towering between heaven and earth, majestic and enormous, causing one's heart to surge with emotions. Not long after the appearance of the 9 Ghost Emperor Gates, a giant crimson hand stretched out from the 9th Ghost Emperor Gate and grabbed at them. Boom! In the valley there was a loud explosion. A crimson palm print appeared on the opposite mountain wall. It was as red as blood and glaring. In the next moment, the crimson palm turned into a cloud of blood chi and disappeared in the air, as if it had never existed. However, the crimson palm print on the mountain of the Ghost Emperor Valley was extremely glaring, proving the shocking action of the crimson palm. After a long time, a black-robed figure appeared in the Ghost Emperor Valley. His entire body was hidden in a black robe, as if he was hiding in an abyss, making it impossible to see his face clearly. His aura was restrained, but it could not conceal his powerful strength. At this moment, the black-robed figure looked at the crimson palm print on the mountain and frowned with an ugly expression. After observing for a long time, he finally spoke and murmured, "The appearance of the Ghost Emperor Crimson Hand is an ominous sign. Could something have happened in the Ghost Emperor tomb?" He was curious, but he did not act rashly. His figure moved and disappeared. At the same time, in the plentiful city restaurant, Lord Sword Sage, what happened just now? Nie Tian asked Yen Lingyun with a frown. He could not hide the shock on his face. The Ghost Emperor tomb has opened. Yen Lingyun nodded and said, "Let's go to the Ghost Emperor Valley immediately." "Okay." Feng Qi nodded and agreed, appearing very excited. Then, the group did not stay any longer and directly headed for the Ghost Emperor Valley. At this moment, the entire plentiful city was in an uproar. Countless cultivators swarmed toward the Ghost Emperor Valley. Although most of them knew that with their strength and status, they were not qualified to enter the Ghost Emperor tomb. But if they could enter the Ghost Emperor Valley, they could just watch the show. Under the lead of Yen Lingyun and Huangfu Changxing, Nie Tian and the others rushed toward the Ghost Emperor Valley. After a while, they arrived outside the Ghost Emperor Valley. At this moment, countless ghost-faced martial artists are guarding the Ghost Emperor Valley. Some of the weaker martial artists do not even have the qualifications to approach the Ghost Emperor Valley. Even if they were from the 7 major sects, without a sect leader or an elder-level martial artist to lead them, they would not be able to enter the Ghost Emperor Valley. Nie Tian secretly paid attention and did not see anyone from the 10,000-layer mountain sect. It was likely that the 10,000-layer mountain sect did not participate in the Ghost Emperor's burial mound. At this time, everyone was queuing up with a large distance between each other, waiting to enter the Ghost Emperor Valley. "Stinking brat, it's you." At this time, a voice suddenly rang out. It was extremely angry, and it was actually directed at Nie Tian. Nie Tian sensed a familiar aura and his face sank. He turned around and saw a familiar face. It was 100 Rivers Divine Sect's Elder Zhu Hong. Previously, when Nie Tian was at the 10,000-layer mountain sect, he had killed a disciple of the 100 Rivers Divine Sect, Zhu Zhenbei, which angered Zhu Hong. He did not expect to meet Zhu Hong here again. At this time, beside Zhu Hong stood a blue-clothed middle-aged martial artist and 2 young martial artists. Obviously, they were sent by the 100 Rivers Divine Sect to enter the Ghost Emperor burial mound. "Stinking brat, your 10,000-layer mountain sect does not dare to come to the Shadow Mountain. I did not expect you to come by yourself." Zhu Hong thought that there was no expert beside Nie Tian, so he took a step forward and walked towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned and said cold, "Elder Zhu, this is the ghost city of Fengdu. You'd better not act recklessly." "Act recklessly?" Zhu Hong smiled cold and roared, "Stinking brat, I will kill you now. What can you do?" As he spoke, he released his entire body's aura. Waves of violent energy surged in the void. It was extremely terrifying and pressed towards Nie Tian. Bam! However, Nie Tian wasn't afraid in the slightest. The corners of his mouth curled into a cold arc as he took a step forward and directly broke through Zhu Hong's oppressive aura. He even forced Zhu Hong to take a few steps back and almost fall down. Zhu Hong was only a peak God realm expert, but he wanted to use his aura to suppress Nie Tian? What a joke! Although Nie Tian hadn't reached the peak paramount God level yet, his true battle prowess was already comparable to a peak God realm expert. Even if he had to fight Zhu Hong to the death, he still had a chance of winning. "How could you be so strong, brat?" Zhu Hong was so shocked that he couldn't speak for a long moment. The last time he had seen Nie Tian, the latter had been far weaker than he was now, and had been crushed by him. But now, in less than a month, Nie Tian's aura was already on the same level as his own. The speed at which he was improving was terrifying. Scram! Nie Tianling roared coldly and didn't say another word. Yan Lingyun and Huang Fu Zhangxing saw this, but they didn't make a move because there was no need to. Old 7, who is this brat? At this moment, the middle-aged martial artist in green walked up and asked coldly, looking at Nie Tian with a gloomy face. Second brother, he's from the 10,000 Mountain sect. He killed Jinbei. Zhu Hong's eyes flashed coldly as he said in a deep voice. The martial artist in green's face darkened when he heard Zhu Hong's words, and killing intent surged in his eyes. This martial artist in green was none other than Zhu Hong's second brother, Zhu Dajiang, who was also Zhu Jinbei's father. Zhu Dajiang was naturally furious that Zhu Jinbei had been killed in the 10,000 Mountain sect. He wanted to avenge his son even in his dreams. Unfortunately, the 10,000 Mountain sect was already under Mu Honglio's control. He obviously didn't dare to go to the 10,000 Mountain sect to seek revenge for Nie Tian. He had never thought that he would meet the person who killed his son here. Moreover, it seemed that Nie Tian was alone, and there were no strong cultivators following him. Little bastard, pay for my son's life. In the next instant, Zhu Dajiang roared angrily. Then, his body moved and he slammed his palm fiercely. A terrifying palm force burst out, wanting to kill Nie Tian directly. However, at this moment, something strange happened. The aura around Zhu Dajiang suddenly stopped. His entire body was like a piece of wood, unmoving. What a cold aura! In the space, an extremely cold aura surged, causing the surrounding people to feel a bone-chilling coldness. As for Zhu Dajiang, he was directly frozen by this chilling aura. Scram! In the next moment, a low roar was heard. Then, the space moved and Zhu Dajiang's body flew backward, smashing into a huge rock. The rock was smashed into pieces. Zhu Dajiang stood up, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. His face was full of shock. Looking at the person in front of him, he said in shock, You're the master of the ice tower? The person who attacked was none other than Huang Fu Zhangxing. People of the Zhu clan, if you dare to come within 1,000 meters of Nie Tian again, I'll kill you. Huang Fu Zhangxing did not waste time talking nonsense with Zhu Dajiang, and directly threatened him in a deep voice. Zhu Dajiang was so scared that his eyes flickered when he sensed the coldness in Huang Fu Zhangxing's eyes. He could not help but take a few steps back. He initially thought that there were no strong cultivators around Nie Tian, but he did not expect the master of the ice tower to suddenly attack. Chapter 26:10. Chapter 26:10. Chapter 26:10 Memories erased. Zhu Dajiang looked at Huang Fu Zhangxing in shock. He had no idea what was going on. Still not scramming? Huang Fu Zhangxing roared. Zhu Dajiang's face stiffened. He retreated a few thousand meters away from Nie Tian. Thank you, Tower Lord. Nie Tian smiled and thanked Huang Fu Zhangxing. Huang Fu Zhangxing nodded and didn't say anything. On the other side, a pair of dark eyes stared at Nie Tian. If Nie Tian saw this person, he would recognize him immediately. It was the Thousand Cloud Divine Sect's sect leader, Ji Gufeng. At this moment, Ji Gufeng's expression was very strange. He thought to himself, just who is this kid? He has Ice Tower Master and Sword Sage Lingyun by his side. Just now, when Zhu Dajiang made a move against Nie Tian, Ji Gufeng discovered that it was not only Huang Fu Zhangxing who made a move. Yan Lingyun, who was at the side, actually also wanted to make a move. It was just that Huang Fu Zhangxing beat him to it. Both Ice Tower Master and Sword Sage Lingyun were peak existences in the frozen remains. These two powerful experts were actually standing beside Nie Tian at the same time. This was simply too strange. Wasn't Nie Tian a disciple of the 10,000 Mountain sect? Ji Gufeng had never heard of any relationship between the 10,000 Mountain sect and the Ice Tower. He also didn't know that the 10,000 Mountain sect was on good terms with Sword Sage Lingyun. In fact, Ji Gufeng also wanted to attack Nie Tian just now. He was glad that he didn't. Otherwise, he would be in trouble. Any one of the Ice Tower Master or Sword Saint Lingyun would be able to crush him. Looking at Nie Tian from afar, Ji Gufeng smiled coldly and said grimly, "Kid, you're protected by powerful experts right now. But when we enter the Ghost Emperor's legacy, things might change." A small interlude ended just like that. Following that, Nie Tian and the rest lined up quietly, waiting to enter the Ghost Emperor Valley. Nie Tian discovered that when they entered the Ghost Emperor Valley, they were actually entering one by one and their speed was extremely slow. After waiting for about half an hour, it was finally his turn. At this moment, the person guarding the Ghost Emperor Valley was the Ghost King. As he got closer to the Ghost King, Nie Tian sensed that the latter's aura was extremely powerful. "Nie Tian, try your best to enter the 9th Ghost Emperor's gate." The Ghost King looked at Nie Tian with a heavy gaze and warned. "The 9th Ghost Emperor gate?" Nie Tian was stunned. He didn't know what the Ghost King meant. "Go in." The Ghost King did not explain anything to him and said directly. Nie Tian nodded and stepped into the Ghost Emperor Valley. As soon as he entered the valley, Nie Tian sensed a strong scent of blood, causing him to furrow his brows. In the next moment, he suddenly raised his head and saw the bloody handprint on the huge mountain. The stench of blood in the valley came from the blood-colored handprint. "What is this?" Nie Tian was stunned and shocked. Yen Lingyun and the others entered the valley before Nie Tian. At this moment, they were also looking at the blood-colored handprint in a daze. No one knew what this blood-colored handprint meant. After a few seconds, Nie Tian became cold. He suddenly raised his head and saw an even more surprising scene. In the valley, the 9 Ghost Emperor gates stood tall like an ancient giant, emitting an ancient and vicissitude aura. Nie Tian looked at the Ghost Emperor gates and couldn't say anything for a long time. This is the Ghost Emperor gate that Lord Ghost King mentioned? After a long time, Nie Tian came to his senses and asked with a trembling voice. "Yes." Beside him, Yen Lingyun said in a deep voice. There was a hint of fear in his eyes, as if the Ghost Emperor gate was a very scary monster. "Lord Sword Sage, what is the use of these 9 Ghost Emperor gates?" Nie Tian looked at the Ghost Emperor gate and felt the huge restrictive aura. He couldn't help but ask Yen Lingyun, who was beside him. "The Ghost Emperor gate will only appear when the Ghost Emperor's remains opens. It is the gate to the Ghost Emperor's remains," Yen Lingyun said in a deep voice. "At the same time, the Ghost Emperor gate is also the gate to leave the Ghost Emperor's remains. In the past, the Ghost Emperor gate will close within a month. If a cultivator cannot leave the Ghost Emperor's remains within a month, they will be trapped inside and can only wait for the next time the Ghost Emperor gate opens. What is even more strange is that all cultivators will have their memories of the Ghost Emperor's remains wiped out when they leave the Ghost Emperor's remains. In other words, cultivators will not remember anything that happened in the Ghost Emperor's remains." Memories wiped? Nie Tian was stunned, his face filled with shock. He never imagined that the Ghost Emperor gate would have such a use. Didn't that mean that no one knew what was inside the Ghost Emperor's remains? Even the people who had entered the Ghost Emperor's tomb before knew nothing about it. The Ghost Emperor gate's ability to erase memories shocked Nie Tian. It was too mysterious and magical. "Lord Sword Sage, why are there 9 Ghost Emperor gates?" Nie Tian became cold and asked. "The Ghost Emperor gates are very mysterious. They will sense and make a choice for every cultivator that enters them." Yen Lingyun smiled faintly and said, "Different cultivators will enter different Ghost Emperor gates because of their different talents and strength. Generally speaking, the more talented and powerful a martial artist is, the deeper the Ghost Emperor's door will be." "Oh, so that's how it is." Nie Tian nodded, understanding now. Only now did he understand why the Ghost King told him to enter the 9th Ghost Emperor gate. The 9th Ghost Emperor Gate meant that the cultivator had outstanding talent. At this time, Nye Tian looked at Jun Aoqing, wondering if he should let her enter the 9 extremities directly. Yu Ji Wushuang was already in the 9 extremities. After Nye Tian obtained the all-wood spiritual heart, he let Yu Ji Wushuang fuse with it. Fat Cat said that Yu Ji Wushuang needed about a month to fuse with the all-wood spiritual heart. Yu Qingqi was not happy about Nye Tian letting Yu Ji Wushuang fuse with the all-wood spiritual heart, but he did not dare to object. After all, it was Nye Tian who obtained the all-wood spiritual heart. It was up to him to decide who should fuse with it. Nye Tian, it's better not to let Jun Aoqing enter the 9 extremities. At this time, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded, saying in a deep voice, "Why?" Nye Tian was stunned, feeling a little strange. He was mainly worried that if he and Jun Aoqing entered different Ghost Emperor gates, they would be separated. "I don't know either. I just feel that the Ghost Emperor gates are a little strange." Fat Cat frowned, his eyes flashing, as if he was not sure. Nye Tian thought for a while, but in the end, he did not let Jun Aoqing enter the 9 extremities. After a long time, everyone entered the Ghost Emperor Valley. There were thousands of people. These people were all qualified to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Next, the Ghost King appeared, announcing that everyone could enter the Ghost Emperor Gate. "I'll go first." Immediately, a voice sounded, and a cultivator moved, arriving at the first Ghost Emperor Gate, and directly walked in. Chapter 26:11. The Corpse King appears. That guy went in. The crowd's eyes trembled as they watched the scene unfold before them, their faces filled with joy. It was obvious that when the martial artist entered the first Ghost Emperor Gate, he directly entered the Ghost Emperor tomb. "I'll do it." Another voice rang out as another martial artist stepped out and entered the Ghost Emperor Gate. However, this time, the martial artist did not react at all after entering the first Ghost Emperor Gate. "Haha, I'm very talented," the martial artist exclaimed in joy as he stepped into the second Ghost Emperor Gate. In the end, there was no reaction from the second Ghost Emperor Gate as well. Just like that, this cultivator's figure only disappeared after he stepped into the 5th Ghost Emperor door. The crowd watched the disappearing figure with sparkling eyes as they discussed excitedly. "That guy's talent is really strong to be able to step into the 5th Ghost Emperor Gate. I heard that in the past, those who could step into the 5th Ghost Emperor Gate were all top geniuses. I hope I can enter the 5th Ghost Emperor Gate too." As the crowd discussed, more people entered the Ghost Emperor Gate. The Ghost Emperor Gate was very mysterious as only one martial artist could enter at a time. If a martial artist had already entered, the other martial artists would not be able to get close to the Ghost Emperor Gate. Even so, the speed at which the crowd entered the Ghost Emperor tomb was very fast. After half an hour, there were only a few hundred people left in the Ghost Emperor Valley. Nye Tian realized that most of the people were experts of the older generation, including sect leaders and elders of various sections. "Lord Ghost Emperor, will you enter the Ghost Emperor tomb?" At this time, Nye Tian came to the Ghost Emperor's side and asked in a low voice. "Yes." The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "But not now, in half a month's time." "Why?" Nye Tian was stunned, his face filled with surprise. He did not expect that these experts could enter the Ghost Emperor tomb. What was even more unexpected was that the Ghost Emperor would only enter half a month later. If he could enter, why not now? Why wait half a month? The Ghost Emperor's door has a strong bone age restriction. Cultivators older than 50,000 years cannot enter. The Ghost King saw the doubt in Nye Tian's heart and explained, "Half a month from now, the bone age restriction of the Ghost Emperor's door will be at its weakest. That will be the best time for all the experts to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb." However, even when the bone age restriction is at its weakest, not everyone can withstand it. Therefore, not many experts will be able to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb in the end. Nye Tian nodded as he realized what was going on. No wonder Yen Lingyun and the rest did not dare to approach the Ghost Emperor's door. It turned out that they were afraid of the Bone Age restriction. Look, someone has entered the 7th Ghost Emperor Gate. At this time, someone suddenly cried out in surprise, appearing very excited. Nie Tian glanced ahead and saw a figure at the 7th door of the Ghost Monarch Emperor. This figure was not unfamiliar to him. It was the disciple of the selfless sword demon, Yin Tianyi. Since Yin Tianyi was a Xiantian sword meridian martial artist, it was not strange that he could enter the 7th Ghost Emperor's door. Then, Yin Tianyi's figure flickered and he entered the 8th Ghost Emperor's door. At this time, the 8th Ghost Emperor's door still had no reaction. He is going to enter the 9th Ghost Emperor's door. When the crowd saw this scene, they were shocked. Their eyes were trembling non-stop, they were very excited. To be able to see a martial artist enter the 9th Ghost Emperor's door, everyone was shocked. As expected of Mai Qin Shohan's disciple. On the other side, Qin Shohan's voice rang out. She seemed very pleased with herself and her gaze swept across Yen Lingyun. Yen Lingyun, however, did not have any expression and was very calm. In the next moment, when Yin Tianyi stepped into the 9th Ghost Emperor's door, his figure disappeared. Following this, most of the people entered the Ghost Emperor's tomb. In the end, only Nie Tian and the rest were left. I will go first. Feng Qi glanced at them and smiled faintly. Then, his figure moved and he walked towards the Ghost Emperor's door. Feng Qi's talent is very strong, definitely not below Yin Tianyi's. He will definitely enter the 9th Ghost Emperor's door. Nie Tian looked at Feng Qi and the corner of his mouth curled up as he thought to himself. Feng Qi was the one who possessed the 5th odd pupil. There was no doubt that his talent was very strong. Under the gaze of the crowd, Feng Qi really entered the 9th Ghost Emperor's door. Next, Huang Fuhong and Yu Qingqi entered one after another. Huang Fuhong's figure disappeared into the 8th Ghost Emperor's door. His talent was slightly weaker than Feng Qi's. As for Yu Qingqi, he disappeared into the 5th Ghost Emperor's door. Aoqing, you go first. Then, only Nie Tian and Jun Aoqing were left. Nie Tian said to Jun Aoqing. Jun Aoqing nodded and stepped into the Ghost Emperor's door. Finally, her figure disappeared into the 9th Ghost Emperor's door. In the end, only Nie Tian was left. Lord Ghost King, I'm going. He smiled faintly and glanced at the Ghost King before he prepared to enter the Ghost Emperor's door. Wait! However, at this moment, a deep and furious roar suddenly rang out. Then, a black-robed figure appeared in the valley and descended from the sky. This black-robed figure was the first person who came to the Ghost Emperor Valley and saw the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand. You are not allowed to enter. The black-robed figure landed and stared at Nie Tian with a pair of gloomy eyes as he spoke in a cold tone. Nie Tian's gaze froze as he looked at the black-robed figure in astonishment. Although he couldn't see the appearance of the black-robed figure, he could feel that the figure's aura was extremely strong, not weaker than the Ghost King's. Corpse King. The Ghost King looked at the black-robed figure who suddenly appeared and his eyes darkened as he growled in a cold tone. Corpse King. Hearing the Ghost King's voice, Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and his eyes were filled with horror. No wonder the black-robed figure's aura was not weaker than the Ghost King's. It turned out that he was a Corpse King who was also a Sky Coffin Supremacy like the Ghost King. Corpse King. At that moment, everyone else was stunned and looked at the Corpse King in horror. Although the Corpse King and the Ghost King were both supremacy powerhouses of the Ghoul Corpse 13 Sky Coffin, very few people had actually seen the Corpse King. Even for powerhouses like Yen Lingyun and Qin Shohan, it was their first time seeing the Corpse King. In the Ghoul Corpse 13 Sky Coffin, whenever there was anything, the Ghost King would appear. The Corpse King rarely appeared. No one expected that the Corpse King of the Ghoul Corpse 13 Sky Coffin would appear at this time. You are not allowed to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb. The Corpse King didn't care about the others at this time. A pair of cold eyes stared at Nye Tian and said coldly. His voice was very cold and filled with unquestionable determination. Why? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and asked with a stunned expression. Why could others enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb but he couldn't? It seemed that the Corpse King's appearance was to prevent Nye Tian from entering the Ghost Emperor's tomb. There is no why, I just can't. The Corpse King looked cold at Nye Tian and said solemnly, Others can, but you can't. Nye Tian frowned and his face suddenly darkened. Jun Aoqing and the others had already entered the Ghost Emperor's tomb. How could he not enter? I insist on entering. In the next moment, Nye Tian roared angrily and suddenly turned around, preparing to step into the Ghost Emperor's door. Chapter 26:12. The Only Chance. Nye Tian wanted to enter the Ghost Emperor's door, but he discovered that his entire body was restrained by an invisible force, and he could not move at all. Let me go! He suddenly turned around and roared at the Corpse Monarch. He did not know why the Corpse King did not allow him to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb, but he knew that he had to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb no matter what. Jun Aoqing and the others had already entered the ancient burial mound. Of course, Nye Tian was worried. Corpse Lord, what are you trying to do? At this moment, the Ghost King opened his mouth and said coldly, You and I have never interfered with each other. Why do you want to stop me from doing what I want to do? Ghost King, you know why. The Corpse Lord spoke in a cold tone. The Ghost Monarch's bloody hand has appeared. You know better than me what this means. Letting him enter the Ghost Emperor tomb is the same as letting him die. Corpse King, you. The Ghost King's gaze trembled, his eyes were filled with killing intent, and he said in a deep voice, Don't force me. Ghost King, as long as I'm here today, he must not enter the ancient burial mound. The Corpse King did not give in at all. His eyes were equally cold. In the blink of an eye, the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King were on the verge of breaking out. Nye Tian could not help but frown when he heard their conversation. He had no idea what the Corpse Lord was saying. However, he could tell that the Corpse King was trying to save him. According to the Corpse Lord, because of the appearance of the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand, all the cultivators who entered the Ghost Emperor's remains would die. The Corpse Monarch didn't want Nye Tian to die, so it appeared to stop him from entering the Ghost Emperor's tomb. However, this made Nye Tian even more determined to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Because of the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand, Jun Aoqing and the others were already in great danger. Nye Tian naturally had to enter the tomb and think of a way to save them. All the experts present were stunned at this moment. Who would have thought that the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King would actually fight for Nye Tian? What exactly was Nye Tian's identity? Why did he make the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King fall out with each other? Corpse Lord, you know that Nye Tian is our only chance. The Ghost King's eyes were cold and his aura surged. He roared, Are you going to destroy this only chance with your own hands? The Corpse Monarch's gaze was cold and resolute. Even if I die, I won't let him enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Nye Tian was stunned. He had no idea what the Ghost King and the Corpse Lord were talking about. What did he mean by only chance? Corpse Lord, since you insist on doing this, then don't blame me. At this time, the Ghost King growled. His entire body's aura suddenly rose and was released. It was obvious that he was going to fight the Zombie King. Boom! The Corpse Lord took a step forward and similarly released a violent aura. Bang! In the next moment, the two terrifying auras collided with each other. It was as if two boulders had collided, and a muffled sound rang out like thunder. Sword Saint, help me! At this time, Nye Tian suddenly growled. Astral energy surged out from his body, and he forcibly lifted his feet. Yenling Yun was stunned for a moment, but immediately reacted. His silhouette flickered and he stabbed out with his sword. A majestic sword shadow enveloped Nye Tian. Bang! The sword shadow fell and a muffled sound rang out in the air. The invisible force that was controlling Nye Tian was directly broken. In an instant, Nye Tian broke free from the restraints. A pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. His silhouette shot out like a rainbow and entered the Ghost Emperor's door. Nye Tian. The Corpse Lord sensed that something was amiss. He shouted out Nye Tian's name. He wanted to stop Nye Tian, but it was too late. Nye Tian's silhouette was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the 9th Ghost Emperor's door. Damn it! The Corpse Lord roared. He then struck out with his palm towards the Ghost Emperor's door. Bang! The powerful palm shadow fell but was blocked by the Ghost Emperor's door. The 9 Ghost Emperor's doors stood tall in the valley. They were not damaged in the slightest. Corpse Lord, give up. The Ghost King retreated and said in a cold voice, "Do you think the Ghost Emperor's door is something you can destroy? Bastard!" The Corpse Lord suddenly raised his head and said angrily, "You harmed him." The Ghost King smiled and said, "That's not necessarily true. I believe he will bring about a miracle." The Corpse Lord stood there coldly and did not speak for a long time. Half a month later, I will enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb with you. After a long time, the Corpse Lord spoke in a deep voice. After speaking, his silhouette moved and he directly left. The Ghost King looked in the direction where the Corpse Lord left. A strange light flickered in his eyes. He sneered in his heart, "Corpse Lord, aren't you the same as me? You also want to enter the gate of the sacred world?" At this time, Yen Lingyun and the others looked at the Ghost King in confusion. They did not know what the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand was. Why did the Corpse Lord stop Nye Tian from entering the Ghost Emperor's tomb? Was the appearance of the Ghost Emperor's bloody hand an omen of the Ghost Emperor's tomb's destruction? But now, it was useless no matter how anxious Yen Lingyun and the others were. They must wait for half a month before they have the chance to enter the Ghost Emperor's tomb. At the same time, the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Nye Tian's figure appeared in a dense forest with a very strange expression. After he entered the 9th Ghost Emperor's door, he directly came to this dense forest in front of him. At this time, he was very confused. What did the Corpse Lord's sudden appearance mean? What was the meaning of the conversation between the Corpse Lord and the Ghost King? Obviously, the Ghost King had something very important to hide from Nye Tian. Sigh. Let's not think too much first. Let's find Ouching first. After a while, Nye Tian thought hard to no avail, and could only give up. Even though he had a lot of doubts in his heart, the most important thing right now was to find Jun Ouching. The Ghost Emperor's tomb was a relic from the primordial era. It was extremely dangerous inside. Of course, Nye Tian was worried about Jun Ouching being alone in the tomb. But now, Nye Tian had no idea where Jun Ouching was. The 9 Ghost Emperor gates were extremely strange. Even if one were to enter through the same gate, they would still end up in different places in the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Let's see where I am first. After calming down, Nye Tian moved his mind and a map of the entire Ghost Emperor's tomb appeared in his mind. When the Ghost King gave him the map, he used the holographic divine rune to engrave a holographic projection of the entire map. So this is the Wind Ghost Forest. After a while, Nye Tian confirmed his location. At the same time, he estimated that the entire Ghost Emperor's tomb was about 10,000 li in circumference. I didn't expect a small Ghost Emperor's tomb to be so big. Nye Tian shook his head and said, "Looks like it won't be easy to find Ouching." Next, he didn't stay in the same place. Instead, he sprinted towards the dense forest ahead. He wanted to leave the Wind Ghost Forest first. In the Wind Ghost Forest, Nye Tian felt that it was eerie. There seemed to be a strange force in the space. Bang! Just as he was about to leave the Wind Ghost Forest, a loud sound came from afar. Nye Tian was stunned. Then, he moved and dashed over. At the same time, somewhere tens of thousands of meters away from Nye Tian, 2 figures stood in the air, facing each other coldly. One of the figures was very familiar. It was Yu Qingqi. The one standing opposite Yu Qingqi was a cultivator in green. He was from the 100 Rivers divine sect, Zhu Zhenan. At this moment, Yu Qingqi's mouth was stained with blood. He was clearly injured. People from the 10,000 Mountain sect, go to hell. Zhu Zhenan roared and slammed his palm towards Yu Qingqi. Boom! The power of the palm was vast and powerful. The palm's shadow was like a mountain, and it suddenly fell. Chapter 26:13. Extremely bizarre. Yu Qingqi's figure stood in the air. Facing the incoming palm shadow, he was not afraid at all. Boom! In the next moment, Yu Qingqi reacted and struck out with his palm. A terrifying palm shadow whizzed out. However, compared to Zhu Zhenan's palm silhouette, Yu Qingqi's palm was much weaker in terms of momentum and power. After all, Yu Qingqi had only recently stepped into the peak paramount god stage, while Zhu Zhenan was half a step into it. The gap between the two of them was obvious. Rumble! Bang! Then, the two palm shadows collided in the void, and one of the palm shadows was directly shattered. Whoosh! In the next moment, the terrifying palm energy surged like a huge wave and pressed down on Yu Qingqi. Stop! At the moment of life and death, a low roar rang out. Rumble! Then, a sword pierced through the air and blocked the terrifying power of the palm. Yu Qingqi took a few steps backwards. Upon seeing the familiar figure, he exclaimed, "Lord Nye Tian!" Nye Tian flew over and stood between Yu Qingqi and Zhu Zhenan. "Yu Qingqi, are you all right?" He steadied himself and looked at Yu Qingqi. "I'm fine," Yu Qingqi replied, shaking his head with a smile. However, a strange light flickered in his eyes. Meanwhile, Zhu Zhenan looked at Nye Tian and snarled cold, killing intent burning in his eyes. "It's you, you stinking brat! You're from the 100 Rivers divine sect," Nye Tian said with a faint smile. Nye Tian had seen Zhu Zhenan when Zhu Hong had first appeared. He was the one who had followed Zhu Dajiang. He had never imagined that he would run into people from the 100 Rivers divine sect as soon as he arrived in the Ghost Emperor's legacy. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. "My name is Zhu Zhenan," Zhu Zhenan said cold. "I'm Zhu Zhenbei's older brother." Of course, he knew that Zhu Zhenbei had been killed by Nye Tian. "I don't care if you're from Zhenan or Zhenbei. There's only one ending for you when you meet me, death." Nye Tianling smiled coldly. His eyes were also filled with killing intent. Although Zhu Zhenan was a half-step peak expert, in front of Nye Tian, this strength was not enough. Zhu Zhenan chuckled coldly and said, "I'm very curious to see how a piece of trash like you, a late paramount god, is going to kill me. Die!" In the next moment, he roared and slammed his palm down. A powerful palm shadow appeared, causing the void to tremble. Humph! When Nye Tian saw this, he sneered. Starlight Heaven Slash appeared in his hand. Sword intent surged out from his body, and he slashed forward. Boom! The sword's shadow was like a dragon, whistling out, blooming in the sky with a dazzling sword light, the sharp aura almost tearing the world apart. Bang! In midair, the sword shadow and the palm shadow collided. The palm shadow immediately collapsed and turned into a violent wave that rushed into the void. Rumble! Zhu Zhenan didn't even have time to scream before he was engulfed by the sword shadow. Not even his bones remained. A single sword strike had killed a peak half-step expert in the blink of an eye. Nye Tian's Tao of the Sword was at the peak of the unity of sword and martial energy, which meant that he could kill an ordinary half-step expert in a single move. "People from the 100 Rivers God sect better not run into me," Nye Tianling said, chuckling coldly, his eyes glinting with cold light. On the other hand, Yu Qingqi, who was watching from the side, was stunned. His face was blank, and he could not react for a long time. With a faint smile, Nye Tian came to Yu Qingqi's side and asked, "Are you all right, Yu Qingqi?" I'm fine," Yu Qingqi replied, looking a bit embarrassed. Nye Tian probed Yu Qingqi's aura to make sure that he was fine, and then relaxed. Although Yu Qingqi hadn't been of much help, He had been following Nie Tian the entire time. Nie Tian naturally didn't want anything to happen to him. Yu Qingqi's injuries weren't serious, and he would recover after a short rest. Lord Nie Tian, where are we going now? Yu Qingqi asked Nie Tian after he recovered. Let's get out of here first, Nie Tian said with a faint smile. All right, Yu Qingqi nodded and followed closely behind Nie Tian. Nie Tian, don't you feel that this kid from the Yu family is a bit strange? Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounding very strange. Strange? No. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, then he frowned and said. He didn't feel anything strange from Yu Qingqi's body, so he didn't know what was wrong with Fat Cat. Why did she suddenly say that Yu Qingqi was strange? Fat Cat frowned and said, just now when the kid from the Yu family was fighting with that guy, he was obviously not a match for that guy, but he wasn't afraid at all. This isn't in line with his character. When Nie Tian heard Fat Cat's words, he couldn't help but frown. In the past, when Yu Qingqi was in danger, he would panic and ask Yu Ji and Wu Shuang to protect him. When Yu Qingqi was fighting Zhu Zhinan just now, he was indeed a bit too brave. He didn't have the slightest bit of fear. Isn't that a good thing? After thinking for a moment, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, this means that Yu Qingqi has been influenced by me and has become much braver. Fat Cat frowned and murmured, in any case, I feel that this kid is a bit different. You must be careful. Alright, I know. Nie Tian nodded, but he felt that Fat Cat was too suspicious. After a while, Nie Tian and Yu Qingqi walked out of the Wind Ghost Forest and came to the outside of a long valley. At that moment, Nie Tian suddenly heard a furious roar coming from within the valley. Die! Nie Tian shouted. Huang Fu Hong! Hearing this voice, Nie Tian's eyes trembled and he cried out in surprise. This voice wasn't unfamiliar to him. It was Huang Fu Hong's voice. Let's go and take a look. Immediately, Nie Tian said and his figure moved, entering the valley. However, after entering the valley, the scene that greeted his eyes stunned him. Bang! In midair, Huang Fu Hong slashed out with his sword towards a warrior. After a muffled sound, that warrior directly turned into ice shards. Huang Fu Hong killed the warrior with one slash and stood in the air. His eyes were red and he looked like a wild beast. Nie Tian was stunned. He didn't know what that martial artist had done to provoke Huang Fu Hong to make him so angry. Huang Fu Hong. Immediately, Nie Tian's figure moved and he walked towards Huang Fu Hong. However, in the next moment, he suddenly felt that something was wrong and his figure stopped. Nie Tian steadied himself and looked at Huang Fu Hong in astonishment. Killing intent! He exclaimed inwardly. He actually felt murderous aura from Huang Fu Hong's body. At this moment, Huang Fu Hong's eyes emitted a cold light as he stared at Nie Tian. His murderous aura was heavy and bone-chilling. Huang Fu Hong, what's wrong? I'm Nie Tian. Nie Tian was stunned. He didn't know what was going on. He had a strange feeling that the Huang Fu Hong in front of him was very unfamiliar. It was as if Huang Fu Hong had suddenly turned into another person. It was extremely strange. What the hell was going on? Nie Tian's eyes flashed. At the same time, he retreated, putting some distance between him and Huang Fu Hong. Nie Tian, I'm going to kill you. At this time, Huang Fu Hong stared at Nie Tian with bloodshot eyes. The corner of his mouth twitched and he said coldly. Chapter 26:14. Are you crazy? Boom! Huang Fu Hong's sword slashed downwards, causing the entire space to tremble. Waves of sword intent gushed forth, causing frost and snow to appear in a radius of tens of thousands of meters. Nie Tian could feel the coldness in the air. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes. After which, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back as he retreated. His reaction speed was extremely fast, and he directly dodged the sword's shadows. Huang Fu Hong, have you gone mad? In the next instant, Nie Tian stabilized himself as he glared at Huang Fu Hong. Huang Fu Hong's killing intent surged. His eyes were as cold as ice, as though Nie Tian wasn't his friend, but his most hated enemy. Nie Tian had no idea what had just happened. If he hadn't reacted in time, he would have already been injured. Humph humph. Huang Fu Hong's eyes were cold to the extreme. He didn't say anything, but instead, his silhouette flickered as the extreme glacial sword slashed out. 3 gigantic icicles appeared in the air, resembling moving glaciers as they shot towards Nie Tian. Damn it! Nie Tian furrowed his brows. He had no way to retreat and could only face it head-on. 8 Desolation's sword slash. In the next instant, Nie Tian roared in a low voice as he executed the astral heaven slash. Boundless sword intent gushed forth like a raging tempest. Rumble! Pung! 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 Then, explosions and muffled sounds came from the sky. The 3 icicles shattered and turned into countless ice blades, shooting out in all directions. Nie Tian retreated once more, as he stared at Huang Fu Hong with a puzzled look on his face. Huang Fu Hong, what's wrong with you? I'm Nie Tian, don't tell me you don't recognize me? He had no idea what was going on. Why would Huang Fu Hong suddenly attack him? Huang Fu Hong had entered the Ghost Emperor tomb earlier than Nie Tian. Could something have happened to him? Or was he being controlled by someone? But right now, Huang Fu Hong's gaze was austere but not bewildered, sinister but not deranged. He didn't look like he was being controlled at all. Nie Tian felt that Huang Fu Hong seemed to have changed into a different person. It was very strange. I know you're Nie Tian, so I'm going to kill you. Huang Fu Hong's body froze. His eyes were evil and cold, filled with killing intent. As the words left his mouth, the frost and snow around him grew even more frenzied, and as sharp as blades. Nie Tian's pupils constricted when he sensed Huang Fu Hong's killing intent. What was going on? He was already a little confused. Nie Tian, prepare to die. At this time, Huang Fu Hong made his move again. He stood in the air and shouted, "Sky full of ice!" Boom! Then, the extreme ice sword in his hand slashed down violently. A terrifying chill instantly spread out, and the space within tens of thousands of meters turned into an ice cellar. The chilly wind and murderous sword intent danced in the air, turning into a deadly hand that slammed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian lifted his head and saw countless ice blades raining down on him like a rain of arrows. He had nowhere to run. Damn it! He roared, and the 9 dragon veins in his body began to circulate. Instantly, a boundless dragon chi was unleashed, forming an ocean of lightning behind him. Roar! In the next second, a crimson dragon emerged from the ocean of lightning. It roared at the sky, and its aura soared into the sky. Boom! The crimson dragon's enormous body rolled out, compressing the space around it. Nie Tian took a step forward and stood on the dragon's body. Bam bam bam! In the void, countless ice blades bombarded the crimson dragon, but the draconic aura directly shattered it. Huang Fu Hong couldn't help but frown when he saw this. He was shocked. On the other side, Yu Qingqi looked at Nie Tian from afar with a horrified expression. However, his eyes flickered with murderous intent. The corner of his mouth twitched coldly as he thought to himself, "This kid is a little tricky." In the sky, Nie Tian stood on the dragon, resisting the violent power of the ice blades, and approached Huang Fu Hong. "Huang Fu Hong, wake up!" When Nie Tian was only about 1,000 meters away from Huang Fu Hong, he let out a low roar. His eyes trembled as a terrifying psychic power surged out of him. Huang Fu Hong felt that something was wrong. In the next moment, he felt a huge impact on his divine sense, causing him to lose consciousness for a moment. Nie Tian didn't use the demon eye. He only used the starry eye to attack Huang Fu Hong's divine sense and wake him up. Until now, Nie Tian still didn't know what was going on. He could only assume that Huang Fu Hong was being controlled. Huang Fu Hong obviously didn't expect that Nie Tian could release such a terrifying mental energy attack, and he lost consciousness for a moment. At this time, if Nie Tian attacked, he could definitely kill Huang Fu Hong with one sword strike. Of course, he wouldn't attack. He just stood there and watched. Nie Tian. In the next moment, Huang Fu Hong's eyes trembled, and he suddenly woke up. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he shouted in surprise. Huang Fu Hong, you're finally awake. Nie Tian thought that Huang Fu Hong had woken up, and he was pleasantly surprised. His figure moved, and he wanted to walk over. Nie Tian, be careful. But at this time, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded, and she screamed sharply. Go to hell. Almost at the same time, Huang Fu Hong's eyes surged with murderous intent, and he suddenly stabbed out with the Arctic ice sword. A terrifying ice awl, like a mad dragon, roared out. Buzz. The surrounding space let out a low rumble, and rays of Arctic sword essence were like sharp blades, as though they were going to tear everything apart. Nie Tian was shocked. He didn't expect Huang Fu Hong to attack again. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, and Nie Tian didn't have a chance to react. Extreme Yang Heavenly Armor, activate. In an instant, Nie Tian instinctively activated the Extreme Yang Heavenly Armor, and a layer of light surged over his body, and the armor protected him. Bang! In the next moment, the ice all suddenly fell, and it heavily bombarded Nie Tian's body, and he was directly blown away. Hua! While Nie Tian was still flying, the armor on his body had already shattered, and then a terrifying chill enveloped him and penetrated his body. At this moment, Nie Tian felt the blood and meridians in his body suddenly stagnate, and he was actually frozen in an instant. Oh no! Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he screamed in his heart. Although his divine sense was still awake, his entire body was covered with a layer of ice crystals, and he was frozen. Huang Fu Hong's strength was already very strong, and with the addition of the Frost Dragon Pearl's power, his sword principle had broken through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. The strength of his sword essence was extremely shocking. Even under normal circumstances, the battle between Nie Tian and Huang Fu Hong would have had a winner and a loser. Huang Fu Hong suddenly attacked with all his strength, and naturally, Nie Tian couldn't withstand it. Bastard, go to hell! Just as Nie Tian's entire body was frozen, an extremely cold voice suddenly rang out in the void. Huh! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed again, and he heard this extremely familiar voice. His eyes turned, and he saw a very familiar face, Yu Qingqi. Yu Qingqi was currently only 1,000 meters away from Nie Tian, and his eyes were extremely cold, and his murderous intent was heavy as he stared at Nie Tian. Chapter 26:15. Yu Qingqi. Nie Tian saw Yu Qingqi's figure appear, and sensed the killing intent in the latter's eyes, leaving him in shock and astonishment. He had never imagined that Yu Qingqi would appear at this very moment to kill him. Die! Yu Qingqi's lips curled into a devilish smile as he bellowed and slapped out with his palm. The shadow of the palm was like a mountain, crashing down at Nie Tian. Nie Tian's entire body was frozen at the moment, and if he was struck by Yu Qingqi's palm, he would lose a layer of skin even if he did not die. Lord Swordlord, save me! In that split second, Nie Tian had a thought and prepared to open the 9 Ultimates' Swordlord to let him out. The Swordlord had paid a great price to allow Huang Fu Hong to fuse with the Pearl of Frost, and his body was now very weak. Still, he was a demi-saint, and a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Even if he was weaker, he would still be able to handle Huang Fu Hong and Yu Qingqi easily. But just as Nie Tian's mind turned, his eyes trembled once more in utter shock. He was shocked to find that the 9 Ultimates could not be opened. Oh no! Nie Tian cried out in shock, his face stiffening for a moment. There must be something wrong with the space within the Ghost Emperor's tomb that restricted the 9 Ultimates and prevented it from opening. But that was when a violent palm descended from the void. I can only fight it out. Nie Tian frowned and bellowed in his mind, the domain matrix churning wildly as waves of stellar energy surged out. Boom. The stellar energy surged, causing the frozen meridians in Nie Tian's body to start flowing. Imperial fist of the divine war. He bellowed in the very next instant and punched out, only to find that the giant palm had already descended upon him. Bang. With a dull sound, Nie Tian's figure crashed into the ground like a meteor. Boom. His figure landed on the ground like a giant boulder, leaving a crater that was hundreds of meters wide on the ground, while the surrounding boulders were sent flying. Nie Tian's figure lay at the center of the crater, dripping with blood. Is he dead? Yu Qingqi stood high up in the sky, his eyes like those of a venomous wolf, staring at the blood-colored figure. I'm not dead yet. Just as he finished speaking, Nie Tian's figure rose to his feet. QL11 His entire body was a mess of blood and flesh, but his aura did not weaken too much. It was still very powerful. Yu Qingqi, even you want to kill me? Nie Tian's figure flashed, and he leaped out of the huge pit. The blood on his body was cleansed, and his eyes cold stared at Yu Qingqi. He could not understand why even Yu Qingqi would suddenly attack him. Yu Qingqi didn't seem to be under someone's control. Lord Nie Tian, you're so heavily injured, can you still fight? Yu Qingqi didn't answer Nie Tian's question. Instead, his eyes were cold as he spoke in an extremely cold voice. Yu Qingqi, why did you do this? Nie Tian's eyes were cold as he roared angrily. You'll never know the answer to this question. Yu Qingqi sneered, and his aura surged. The murderous aura around him was violent, and it condensed into a substance, enveloping Nie Tian. On the other side, Huang Fuhong's figure also moved. He smiled cold and said, Nie Tian, from the moment you stepped into the Ghost Emperor's door, you were destined to die in the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Nie Tian's eyes focused, and he suddenly looked at Huang Fuhong and replied cold, Is that so? Since Huang Fuhong and Yu Qingqi wanted to kill him, there was no need for him to worry too much, and he would fight with his life. Now, Nie Tian was sure that Huang Fuhong and Yu Qingqi were definitely not under someone else's control. As for why they wanted to kill him, he really could not figure it out. If it was Yu Qingqi, there was a slight possibility that he hated Nie Tian because of the matter of the 10,000 wood spiritual heart, so he wanted to kill him. But what about Huang Fuhong? Why did he want to kill Nie Tian? Although Nie Tian and Huang Fuhong had fought when they first met, it was just a misunderstanding. More importantly, Nie Tian had just saved Huang Fuhong's life. Nie Tian, don't think about it anymore. You will never know why we want to kill you. Huang Fuhong laughed coldly. After which, the extreme ice sword intent around him surged crazily. The frost and snow in the air howled and howled like wild beasts. Nie Tian was stunned. He could feel that Huang Fuhong's sword intent aura had surged a lot more than before, and his heart sank. He knew that Huang Fuhong had activated the extreme ice demonic seal in his body. Nie Tian, I'll kill you with my next sword strike. In the next moment, Huang Fuhong roared and his aura surged. On the extreme ice sword, a layer of icy light surged, and it was extremely terrifying. Extreme ice slash. Immediately afterwards, the corner of Huang Fuhong's mouth twitched as he swung his frigid sword. The frigid sword intent swirling around him instantly condensed into an extremely terrifying sword shadow. Like an enormous ice dragon, it descended from the sky towards Nie Tian with murderous intent. Nie Tian frowned slightly, and then his eyes were filled with determination. Sword sealing forbidden array open. In the next moment, his body trembled slightly, and his sword intent and blood chi surged out at the same time. An enormous array appeared under his feet, and the runes of the array circulated in the air, emitting a terrifying aura. Demonic sword, world scorch. Just as the power of the forbidden array reached its peak, Nie Tian said in a low voice. The godly demon chi in his body surged out, and at the same time, the chaotic flame appeared and burned around him. Instantly, the chaotic flame, blood chi, sword intent, and godly demon chi fused together, and a majestic demonic flame sword appeared in the air. Buzz! The demon sword appeared, and the sound of the sword roared. The frost and snow in the surrounding void were instantly swept away. Die! Nie Tion's eyes were filled with coldness. He roared, and the starlight heavenly slash was unleashed, and the demonic flame sword soared into the sky. Boom! Boom! In the sky, two terrifying sword shadows roared like two ancient wild beasts, and a violent force surged through the air. The extreme ice sword shadow and the demonic flame sword shadow. One was ice and the other was fire. Yu Qingqi, who was watching from the side, was completely dumbfounded. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't make a sound. Boom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided with each other. The extremely violent power suddenly exploded, and there was a thunderous roar in the sky. The void trembled, as if time had stopped for a moment. Boom! Immediately after, an even more violent force appeared in the sky, like a raging wave, wreaking havoc. This time, both Nie Tian and Huang Fuhong went all out in this battle. Huang Fuhong was a legendary swordsman, and with the terrifying extreme ice demonic seal in his body, it was imaginable how powerful his sword was. On the other hand, Nie Tian's sword not only used the forbidden formation, blood chi, but also the godly demon chi and the chaotic flame. It was also extremely terrifying. Chi chi chi. The two sword shadows collided in the sky, like two ice and fire giants, and they wanted to tear each other apart and devour each other. Nie Tian stood in the sky, and the sword intent surged around his body. He knew that if he couldn't withstand this sword, he would definitely be defeated by Huang Fuhong. Yu Qingqi, who was watching from the side, was dumbfounded. He didn't dare to act rashly. Boom! At this moment, the two sword shadows finally couldn't withstand the terrifying force anymore. They suddenly shook and then exploded. Boom! 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 In an instant, endless waves spread out like a tsunami, and it spread in all directions. Chapter 26:16. Chapter 26:16. Chapter 26:16a Powerful Outburst, Rumble. In the void, endless raging waves rushed out, wreaking havoc, as if to tear everything apart. Nie Tian felt the impact of the raging waves and retreated. But unfortunately, he was still one step too late. Boom! A violent wave of sword intent suddenly fell, directly bombarding Nie Tian's body. Bang! With a muffled sound, Nie Tian's figure directly flew out, drawing a bloody trail in the air. On the other side, Huang Fuhong's situation was the same, even worse than Nie Tian, flying thousands of meters away. Nie Tian stabilized his body. His body was a bloody mess, and his face was very pale. The wave of sword intent that he suffered just now contained the two extreme powers of Devil Flame and Extreme Ice. The destructive power was very strong. Fortunately, his martial body was strong, otherwise he would have died on the spot. On the other hand, Huang Fuhong's injuries were more serious than Nie Tian's. His whole body was dripping with blood, almost unable to tell that he was human. His strength was almost on par with Nie Tian, but his martial body was obviously inferior to Nie Tian's. Under the same impact, his martial body almost couldn't bear it. Nie Tian, I didn't expect your strength to be so strong. Huang Fuhong stabilized his body, a pair of eyes as cold as steel, said coldly, but this doesn't change anything, you will definitely die in my hands today. As the cold voice fell, an unbelievable scene happened in the next moment. Huang Fuhong raised his hands, the space around him actually began to flow, a strange power surged out from the space, constantly pouring into Huang Fuhong's body. How is this possible? Nie Tian saw this scene, his face suddenly sank, and he cried out in surprise. He couldn't believe his eyes. Huang Fuhong actually directly absorbed the power from the surrounding space. Moreover, The power in the space was very strange. It actually matched perfectly with Huang Fu Hong's aura, helping him to instantly recover from his injuries. In just the blink of an eye, all the wounds on Huang Fu Hong's body had actually healed, and the aura around him had become even more powerful. This. Nie Tian sucked in a breath of cold air, not daring to believe what he was seeing. In just a blink of an eye, Huang Fu Hong's injuries were actually more or less healed. How was this possible? Even if Nie Tian had the supreme dragon meridians, the earth vein source, and the star essence stone, he wouldn't be able to recover to this extent in an instant. What Nie Tian couldn't figure out the most was how Huang Fu Hong could directly absorb energy from space. Nie Tian, in the Ghost Emperor's tomb, my strength is limitless. If you don't have the strength to kill me in a single move, you'll never be able to kill me. Ah! Huang Fu Hong looked at the surprised Nie Tian and laughed wildly. You're not Huang Fu Hong. In an instant, Nie Tian suddenly understood something. His eyes suddenly sank and he directly growled, Who the hell are you? Although Nie Tian and Huang Fu Hong hadn't known each other for a long time, he was still very clear about the latter's character and strength. Huang Fu Hong definitely wouldn't be so arrogant, and it was also impossible for him to directly absorb energy from space. Previously, Nie Tian also suspected that the person in front of him wasn't Huang Fu Hong. However, this fellow's aura was exactly the same as Huang Fu Hong, so he dispelled this thought. But now, Huang Fu Hong's arrogant actions made Nie Tian involuntarily doubt it again. Huh! Huang Fu Hong was surprised to hear Nie Tian's angry roar, and then his expression turned strange. With a sinister smile, he said, Nie Tian, are you doubting my identity? I'm your friend, I'm Huang Fu Hong. The sinister voice matched with the sinister eyes. This Huang Fu Hong in front of him gave people a kind of evil feeling. This was a completely different person from the righteous Huang Fu Hong that Nie Tian knew. You're not Huang Fu Hong. Who the hell are you? Nie Tian's eyes were murderous as he opened his mouth again. Kid, you're not bad. You actually saw through it. Huang Fu Hong laughed coldly and no longer pretended. He said coldly, But it doesn't matter. You're going to die soon anyway. To a dead person, it doesn't matter whether he knows the truth or not. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly shrunk, incomparably horrified. Although he already determined that the person in front of him wasn't Huang Fu Hong. But hearing Huang Fu Hong personally deny his identity, it still made him very shocked. This person in front of him wasn't Huang Fu Hong. Then who could he be? Where was the real Huang Fu Hong? Where did this fake Huang Fu Hong come from? What puzzled Nie Tian the most was that this fake Huang Fu Hong not only had the same aura as Huang Fu Hong, but even his strength and moves were exactly the same as Huang Fu Hong. What was going on in front of him? Thinking about this, Nie Tian felt like his head was about to explode. Even his scalp was slightly numb. Nie Tian, don't think anymore. You'll never understand. Just obediently accept your death. At this moment, the fake Huang Fu Hong laughed coldly. His entire body's aura skyrocketed again. The murderous intent in his eyes was thick to the extreme. He said crazily, With this sword, I'll take your life. A low murderous voice rang out. Huang Fu Hong's figure immediately moved. The extreme frost sword slashed down, drawing a cold light in the air. Boom! In the next moment, an incomparably large icicle appeared and slammed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned slightly. What surged in his eyes was not fear, but a strong desire to fight. Since his opponent wasn't Huang Fu Hong, then he really didn't need to worry about anything. Previously, Nie Tian was still a little cautious when he attacked, so he didn't go all out. But now, he really had to fight with all his might. Earth Sword, Moon Devourer. Nie Tian stood in the air. The godly demon force in his body surged out. At the same time, the blood chi around him became violent again. This time, he burned his blood chi and exploded with an extreme sword. Die! In the next moment Nie Tian roared. The shadow of the sword soared into the sky like a mad dragon. Under the stimulation of the blood chi, the godly demon's sword intense power skyrocketed. In addition, Nye Tian used the three defiances of the heavens. The power of this sword was unimaginable. Die! 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 Nye Tian's roar echoed in the air. It was extremely violent, low, and murderous. Boom! The terrifying shadow of the sword roared like an ancient beast. Kaboom! In the next moment, the shadow of the sword collided with the icicle, causing an explosion in the air. Bang! 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 Under the impact of the berserk sword intent, the giant icicle was actually unable to withstand it. It shattered bit by bit and shot into the void. Impossible! When Huang Fu Hong saw this scene, his eyes suddenly trembled, and he shouted in horror. He never expected Nye Tian to be able to unleash such a terrifying attack despite being severely injured. The power of this attack was even more terrifying than the demonic flame shadow sword. Bang! At that moment, the giant icicle in the air could no longer withstand the impact of the sword intent. It shattered into countless pieces of ice and exploded in the air. Chapter 26:17 Ghost Emperor's Mirror Image. Boom! The violent sword shadow fell from the sky, and a terrifying aura surged in the void. Huang Fu Hong suddenly raised his head. At this moment, he felt the aura of death. His pupils suddenly shrank and the fear in his heart reached the extreme. He never thought that Nye Tian's explosive power under serious injuries would be this terrifying. In the next moment, the sword shadow fell and Huang Fu Hong's body was directly submerged in the sword shadow. Not even his bones were left. Yu Qingqi saw this scene from afar and was completely stunned. His expression was lifeless and he was petrified on the spot. Nye Tian's figure stood high in the sky. His face was as pale as paper and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. The sword attack just now had almost exhausted all his strength. Moreover, he had burned his blood chi twice, causing his martial body to reach its limit. However, at this time, he suddenly raised his head and locked his cold eyes on Yu Qingqi. He said in a deep voice, "Since Huang Fu Hong is fake, you should also be fake." Yu Qingqi heard Nye Tian's words, and as if he had just woken up from a dream, he shouted in a trembling voice, I am real." "Really?" Nye Tianling laughed and said in a deep voice, "I don't care if you are real or fake, I will kill you." Actually, Fat Cat had reminded Nye Tian that Yu Qingqi was a little strange. However, Nye Tian did not take it to heart. Now that he thought about it, Yu Qingqi was indeed not normal. However, even if Nye Tian took it to heart, he could not have imagined that the Yu Qingqi who followed him was actually a fake. At this time, Nye Tian took a step forward and the killing intent in his eyes became even sharper. Even if he was an arrow at the end of its flight, he still wanted to kill Yu Qingqi. Yu Qingqi was stunned at first. Then, he sensed that Nye Tian's aura was very weak. He immediately calmed down and said with a sneer, "Nye Tian, you have reached your limit. Do you still have the strength to kill me?" "Just an ant. Even if I only have one breath left, killing you is as easy as flipping my hand." Nye Tianling responded with a smile. The realm origin formation within his body was constantly operating. At this moment, he had almost used up all of his energy, so he could only rely on the power of the stars to kill Yu Qingqi. "Is that so?" Yu Qingqi sneered. After that, his silhouette flickered and he actually took the initiative to send a palm strike towards Nye Tian. "Yes," Nye Tian stood still, but the corner of his mouth twitched as he spat out a word coldly. "Dark Star Ghost Kill." In the next moment, he stabbed out with his sword. The void shook for a moment, and an invisible sword shadow shot out. Bang! Immediately after, a muffled sound came from the sky. Yu Qingqi's body directly exploded, turning into a bloody light. Even in death, he did not understand where Nye Tian's elemental meridians had come from when they were clearly exhausted. Bang! However, at the same time, Nie Tian was also hit by the palm shadow in the sky. His silhouette was sent flying for 1,000 meters, and he finally managed to stand up. At this moment, his martial body was extremely weak. His silhouette swayed slightly in the sky, as if he would fall at any time. Fortunately, he had already killed the fake Huang Fuhong and Yu Qingqi. For the time being, there was no one to threaten him. After that, Nie Tian's silhouette landed, and he spread out his divine sense to sense the valley in front of him. After confirming that there was no one inside, he walked in. After Nie Tian entered the valley, Fat Cat shouted in surprise, "I know!" "Fat, what do you know?" Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, then his eyes became hot and he asked in surprise, "I know what is going on." Fat Cat laughed excitedly and said in a loud voice, "Those 9 Ghost Emperor doors are indeed terrifying. It's unbelievable." "Fat, what is going on?" Seeing Fat Cat so excited, Nie Tian became even more curious and hurriedly asked. It was obvious that Fat Cat had discovered some secret of the Ghost Emperor doors. That was why it was so excited. Nie Tian, the Huang Fuhong and Yu Qingqi you just met were mirror images created by the Ghost Emperor doors. Fat Cat said loudly with a proud smile. Mirror images? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He didn't quite understand what Fat Cat meant. He said in surprise, "Could it be that the Huang Fuhong and Yu Qingqi just now were fake? They don't exist?" "No, of course they exist." Little Fat Cat laughed and said, "Do you still remember when a martial artist enters the Ghost Emperor's door, they enter one door at a time? In fact, during this process, the Ghost Emperor's door records all the information of the martial artist. Then, the Ghost Emperor doors, according to the recorded information, create a mirror image of the martial artist. This mirror image not only has the martial artist's strength and talent, it even has all the martial artist's memories. The only difference between the Ghost Emperor mirror image and the martial artist itself is that the Ghost Emperor mirror image exists to kill all the martial artists who enter the Ghost Emperor tomb." Hearing Fat Cat's words, Nie Tian was stunned and couldn't say anything for a long time. He finally understood why the fake Huang Fuhong had Huang Fuhong's strength and even knew him. The Ghost Emperor mirror image even copied the martial artist's memories. The Ghost Emperor doors is really amazing. It can actually create a mirror image that is exactly the same as the martial artist itself in such a short time. Fat Cat exclaimed and said, "This sovereign reckons that the more talented the martial artist, the more complex the mirror image created by the Ghost Emperor doors. 9 Ghost Emperor doors. The further one goes, the stronger the duplication ability." Nie Tian reacted at this time and calmed down a lot. So when a martial artist enters the Ghost Emperor door, the Ghost Emperor mirror image is born. The Ghost Emperor door was really terrifying and bizarre to the extreme. At this moment, Nie Tian also understood why Huang Fuhong was able to directly absorb power from the space inside the Ghost Emperor tomb. Because Huang Fuhong originated from the Ghost Emperor tomb in the first place, one had to admit that the space inside the Ghost Emperor tomb was very strange. Nie Tian was actually unable to open the 9 extremes inside the tomb. It should be that the space inside the tomb was sealed. Any spatial-type artifact was unable to open it. Except, he did not know if Jun Aoqing's spacetime sword intent could be unleashed normally inside the Ghost Emperor tomb. Crap. Thinking of Jun Aoqing, Nie Tian suddenly realized something and involuntarily cried out. His expression changed along with it, incomparably horrified. He suddenly thought that he must have been duplicated by the Ghost Emperor door too. And his mirror image was inside the Ghost Emperor tomb at this time. And the purpose of the Ghost Emperor mirror image's existence was to kill off all the martial artists who entered the Ghost Emperor tomb. These martial artists, of course, included Jun Aoqing. If Nie Tian's mirror image found Jun Aoqing, wouldn't the latter die without a doubt? Not to mention that Jun Aoqing was not Nie Tian's opponent, if she encountered Nie Tian's mirror image, she would not have the slightest bit of vigilance. If Nie Tian's mirror image suddenly attacked Jun Aoqing would definitely die. No. I'm going to find Jun Aoqing. Thinking of this, Nie Tian growled and immediately took a step forward. Puff! But he had just taken 2 steps when he vomited a mouthful of blood. The current him was too weak and urgently needed to rest. Nie Tian, don't be impulsive. Recover first before talking. Of course, Fat Cat knew what Nie Tian was thinking and said solemnly, "You must calm down. If you walk out in this state, you will encounter any mirror image martial artist, and you will be killed." And Nie Tian nodded heavily, his entire being calmed down. In any case, he had to recover his strength as soon as possible. Otherwise, even if he found Jun Aoqing, not only would he not be able to help the latter, but he would also become the latter's burden. Then, without hesitation, Nie Tian directly sat cross-legged and entered a state of recovery. Half a day later, Nie Tian stood up. His body had almost recovered and he was ready to leave the canyon immediately. At this time, outside the canyon, a figure appeared. It was the person Nie Tian was familiar with, Feng Qi. Chapter 26:18. Chapter 26:18. Chapter 26:18. In Tianyin the canyon, Nie Tian was preparing to leave. At this moment, he suddenly sensed a familiar aura coming towards the canyon at high speed. Feng Qi. In an instant, Nie Tian felt that it was Feng Qi's aura, but he frowned and his face darkened. He couldn't be sure if this Feng Qi was the real Feng Qi or the mirror image. The most important thing was that Nie Tian hadn't fully recovered. If he met Feng Qi's mirror image, it would be terrible. Nie Tian. At this moment, Feng Qi's voice sounded. His figure moved and entered the valley directly. Nie Tian's gaze froze, and he looked at Feng Qi cautiously without saying a word. Nie Tian, what's wrong? I'm Feng Qi. Feng Qi felt that Nie Tian's gaze was strange, and he couldn't help but be stunned. You're the real Feng Qi? Nie Tian's gaze was gloomy, and he sensed Feng Qi's aura fluctuations. At the same time, he stared at the latter's eyes with extreme caution. He almost died in the hands of Huang Fuhong's mirror image just now, so he naturally had to be very careful this time. Of course I'm the real Feng Qi, the real one. Feng Qi screamed, confused. Nie Tian, this guy is the real one. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice sounded, and she said with certainty. Although the aura and strength of the real body and the mirror image were the same, it was still very easy to distinguish between them. What Feng Qi did now could only be done by the real body. I believe you're Feng Qi. Nie Tian let out a long breath and relaxed a lot. Feng Qi looked at Nie Tian, but his expression changed, and he became flustered. Feng Qi, what's wrong? Nie Tian couldn't help but ask when he saw that Feng Qi wasn't in a good mood. Nie Tian, I just did something, but you have to believe me, I was really forced to do it. Feng Qi's eyes flickered, he was very panicked, and he didn't even dare to look at Nie Tian. What did you do? Nie Tian was stunned and asked with a frown. I. Feng Qi stuttered for a long time before finally saying, I killed Huang Fuhong. What? When Nie Tian heard Feng Qi's words, he was stunned, and his expression was extremely shocked. Seeing Nie Tian's reaction, Feng Qi quickly waved his hand and said, Nie Tian, I was really forced to do it. I met Huang Fuhong on the way, but who knew that guy would suddenly sneak attack me? Fortunately, I reacted quickly and escaped the sneak attack. But that guy was like a madman, he wanted to kill me. In the end, I was forced to kill him. Feng Qi said with a depressed look on his face. Nie Tian reacted at this time, but his expression was very surprised. He stared at Feng Qi and asked, Feng Qi, are you sure that the person you killed was Huang Fuhong? Yes, I'm sure. Feng Qi was stunned for a moment and said, How could I be wrong about Huang Fuhong? The appearance and aura are all right. How is this possible? Nie Tian was stunned again, His expression was very ugly, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. Of course, he knew that the Huang Fu Hong that Feng Qi killed was absolutely not the real one, but a mirror image. But Huang Fu Hong's mirror image had already appeared, and was killed by Nie Tian. Feng Qi actually also encountered Huang Fu Hong's mirror image. This was very strange. Could it be? At this time, Fat Cat's scream sounded, and she said in horror, "The Ghost Emperor's door can create more than one Ghost Emperor mirror image." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He also thought of this possibility, and this was the only explanation. If the Ghost Emperor's door's ability to create a martial artist's mirror image was unlimited, then it was very scary. One mirror image of Huang Fu Hong had already beaten Nie Tian half to death. If dozens of Huang Fu Hongs appeared at the same time, how could Nie Tian possibly fight back? Wait. At this time, Nie Tian suddenly thought of something, looked at Feng Qi abruptly and asked, "Feng Qi, you said that Huang Fu Hong ambushed you and was killed by you in the end." Yeah. Feng Qi was stunned for a moment, not knowing why Nie Tian asked this. How is this possible? Nie Tian was stunned once, with a puzzled look, feeling that it was inconceivable. In his view, Huang Fu Hong's strength was absolutely not beneath Feng Qi's. If Huang Fu Hong ambushed Feng Qi in a situation where he was caught off guard, even if the latter did not die, he would definitely be seriously injured. But the Feng Qi in front of him was completely unscathed. This was too strange. The strength of Huang Fu Hong's mirror image, Nie Tian personally experienced it. And Feng Qi's strength was also revealed in the battle with Yin Tianyi. It was absolutely impossible for Feng Qi to crush Huang Fu Hong's mirror image, unless the mirror image that Feng Qi encountered was very weak. Feng Qi, when you killed Huang Fu Hong, what did you think of his strength? After calming down, Nie Tian looked at Feng Qi and asked. To be honest, a little weak. Feng Qi hesitated for a moment and said, I originally thought that Huang Fu Hong was about the same as me, but I only used one spear and killed him. When Nie Tian heard what Feng Qi said, his brows furrowed. It seemed like his guess was right. The Huang Fu Hong mirror image that Feng Qi encountered was indeed very weak. It seemed like the Ghost Emperor mirror image created by the Ghost Emperor's door was not the same. Nie Tian, do you know something? Feng Qi saw that Nie Tian's expression was strange and not angry at all. He could not help but be puzzled and asked in surprise. Feng Qi, I also killed someone just now, and that person almost killed me. Do you know who that person is? Nie Tian looked up at Feng Qi and asked with a faint smile. I don't know. I don't know. Feng Qi was stunned for a moment and was very surprised. He knew that Nie Tian's strength was above his. Who was it that almost killed Nie Tian? Could it be Yin Tianyi? In the next moment, Feng Qi blurted out. No. Nie Tian smiled and shook his head. He said word by word, It's Huang Fu Hong. Huang Fu Hong. Feng Qi's eyes trembled and he directly cried out. How could he possibly think that the person who almost killed Nie Tian was actually Huang Fu Hong? But this was even more strange. How could Nie Tian kill Huang Fu Hong? Because Huang Fu Hong was just killed by him. Nie Tian looked at the shocked Feng Qi and the corner of his mouth raised slightly. He was very calm. Nie Tian, what the hell is going on? Why are there two Huang Fu Hongs? Feng Qi forced himself to calm down and looked at Nie Tian and asked in shock. Feng Qi, listen carefully to everything I'm going to tell you. Nie Tian smiled faintly and no longer hid anything. He told Feng Qi everything about the Ghost Emperor mirror image. Feng Qi heard Nie Tian's words and was directly petrified. So the Huang Fu Hong I killed was a mirror image. After half a day, Feng Qi reacted and his expression changed as he blurted out in astonishment, If the Ghost Emperor's door can create mirror images, doesn't that mean there's also a mirror image of me in the Ghost Emperor's tomb? Yes. Nie Tian nodded his head and said, Not only your mirror image, but mine, and everyone else's mirror images as well. However, I don't know how many mirror images the Ghost Emperor's door can create. This is bad. Feng Qi calmed himself down and said with a wry smile, if I encounter my mirror image, wouldn't I have to fight myself? Nie Tian frowned his brows as he also thought of the same problem. In fact, he was looking forward to seeing how strong his mirror image was. Feng Qi, let's leave this place at once. Find Jun Aoqing, Huang Fuhong, and the others as soon as possible and tell them everything. Nie Tian quickly reacted and said. He had to find Jun Aoqing and the others now. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. Following that, Nie Tian and Feng Qi left the canyon. But just as they came out of the canyon, several figures came from the void. In Tianni. Nie Tian sensed a familiar aura and his expression changed as he looked up into the void. However, the scene that greeted his eyes caused him to be stunned for a moment. In the void, 4 figures appeared and stared at Nie Tian and Feng Qi cold. These 4 figures actually had the same face. They were all in Tianni. Chapter 26:19. Chapter 26:19. Chapter 26:19 9 Mirror images. Nie Tian's heart sank when he saw the 4 in Tianni appearing at the same time. He knew that the 4 in Tianni in front of him were all mirror images created by the door of Ghost Emperor. But if these 4 mirror images had the same strength as in Tianni, he and Feng Qi would definitely not be a match for the 4 mirror images. As for how strong in Tianni was, Nie Tian still didn't know. Previously, he had a short fight with In Tianni, but was stopped by Ghost King. Although he had yet to recover from his injuries, In Tianni obviously didn't unleash his strongest power. If he were to face one In Tianni, even if Nie Tian didn't have much of a chance of winning, he would have no problem protecting himself. But there were 4 In Tianni in front of him at the same time, and he couldn't help but worry. 4 In Tianni. Feng Qi looked at the 4 silhouettes in midair and was stunned for a moment. Then, he let out a strange cry and couldn't hide the horror in his eyes. He had once lost to In Tianni and was very wary of the latter. Nie Tian. At this moment, one of the mirror images spoke. His eyes were extremely cold as he stared at Nie Tian with a strong murderous intent. Feng Qi. Then, another mirror image spoke. His murderous gaze locked onto Feng Qi. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he felt the aura of the 4 mirror images. His tense expression eased a little. He could feel that the aura of the 4 mirror images were very strong, but compared to the real In Tianni, they seemed to be a little weaker. Attack! In the next moment, one of the mirror images growled. Wind and fire 9 revolutions appeared in his hand, and he stabbed it down. The shadow of the sword swooped down like a giant dragon. Nie Tian saw this and didn't panic at all. He smiled faintly and stomped hard on the ground. His body soared into the sky, and the sword intent condensed crazily. Starry Sky Slash was unleashed. Boom! Instantly, the murderous shadow of the sword whizzed out towards the mirror image. When the mirror image sensed the terrifying sword essence, it couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Its eyes suddenly trembled, and it was obvious that it was extremely shocked. He didn't expect Nie Tian's strength to be so terrifying. Bang! In the next moment, the sword shadow descended, and with a muffled bang, the Ghost Emperor's mirror image was blasted into a bloody light. Not even a corpse remained. Huh! Feng Qi couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when he saw this scene. Why is it so weak? He originally thought that these mirror images would be very strong, but he didn't expect them to be so weak that they couldn't even block a single strike from Nie Tian. Damn it! Seeing their companion killed, the other 3 mirror images roared at the same time and locked their murderous eyes on Nie Tian. Kill! The 3 mirror images let out furious roars at the same time. Amidst their frenzied battle cries, 3 streams of powerful sword intent shot towards Nie Tian from 3 different directions. You're too weak. Nie Tianling glanced at the 3 mirror images and laughed wildly. His body suddenly shook, and a wave of sword aura soared into the sky, directly shattering the 3 incoming sword shadows. Huh! The 3 mirror images were stunned at the same time, and their faces revealed a horrified expression. They were actually a little afraid. Die! At this moment, Nie Tian's lips curled up into a cold smile, and then without hesitation, he attacked with his sword. Boom! 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 The 3 sword shadows attacked together, and the 3 mirror images, like the first mirror image, turned into a bloody light and dissipated in the air. After successfully killing the 4 mirror images, Nie Tian smiled faintly, and his figure landed. This! Feng Qi was dumbfounded, and it took him a long time to react, and he said, "What's going on?" Suddenly encountering 4 mirror images of Yin Tianyi, he thought that there would be a fierce battle, or even a fight to the death. Unexpectedly, he didn't even have a chance to attack, and the 4 mirror images were all killed by Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned and thought for a moment and said, "It seems that the mirror images created by the Ghost Emperor's door are not the same, and there are strong and weak ones. These 4 mirror images are not strong, and their battle strength is similar to that of an ordinary peak paramount god warrior." "Is it really that amazing?" Feng Qi reacted, and said with a smile, "It seems that my luck is not bad. The mirror image of Huang Fuhong I met was very weak." Nie Tian smiled faintly and nodded. The mirror image of Huang Fuhong he met before was very strong, and its strength was not the slightest bit weaker than Huang Fuhong's body. "Nie Tian, I think I understand." At this time, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded, and a strange light flashed in her eyes, as if she was thinking about something. "Understand what?" Nie Tian was stunned and asked. Fat Cat laughed and didn't answer directly, but asked, "Nie Tian, did you feel that the 4 mirror images just now are not the same, and there are strong and weak ones?" "Yes." Nie Tian nodded. He did feel that the 4 mirror images were not the same, and there were strong and weak ones. But what could this prove? "That's right." Fat Cat smiled again and said, "It seems that my guess is correct. When a warrior passes through the Ghost Emperor's door, the Ghost Emperor's door will create a mirror image." When Nie Tian heard Little Fat Cat's words, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he understood and said, "Little Fat, what you mean is that the number of martial artists' mirror images are determined by how many Ghost Emperor gates they have passed through." "Yes." Fat Cat smiled proudly and said, "If I remember correctly, that kid named Yin Tianyi entered the 9th Ghost Emperor's door, so there are 9 mirror images of him in the Ghost Emperor's tomb." "I understand now." Nie Tian's eyes flickered with a burning desire as he understood what the little Fat Cat was trying to say. With a smile, he said, "Because these mirror images were created by different Ghost Emperor gates, their strengths are also different. The first Ghost Emperor's door is the weakest, so the mirror image created is also the weakest. The 9th Ghost Emperor's door is the strongest, so the mirror image created is also the strongest." "Yes, that must be it." Fat Cat nodded, very sure of her guess. "Fat, you really are a genius." Nie Tian smiled and nodded. Fat Cat's guess was very likely correct. Every Ghost Emperor's door has the ability to create mirror images, so every time a martial artist passes through a Ghost Emperor's door, a mirror image will be created. The Ghost Emperor's doors, from the 1st to the 9th, become stronger, so the mirror images created are also stronger. The 4 Yin Tianyi's mirror images that Nie Tian and Feng Qi encountered at this time should be the mirror images created by the previous Ghost Emperor's doors, so their strength is very weak. If they encountered the mirror images created by the 8th and 9th Ghost Emperor's doors, the battle would not be so completely one-sided. At this time, Fat Cat's voice sounded again and said, "The last Ghost Emperor's door that a martial artist passes through creates a mirror image that is exactly the same as the martial artist's body. The mirror images created by the previous Ghost Emperor's doors are obviously much weaker." "Yes." Nie Tian nodded and said, It seems that the mirror image of Huang Fu Hong I encountered before was created by the 8th Ghost Emperor's door. He remembered that Huang Fu Hong entered the Ghost Emperor's tomb through the 8th Ghost Emperor's door, so the mirror image created by the 8th Ghost Emperor's door had the same strength as his body. And the Huang Fu Hong that Feng Qi encountered was obviously a mirror image created by the previous Ghost Emperor's doors. So, in this Ghost Emperor's tomb, I also have 9 mirror images. Nie Tian frowned and said with a gloomy expression. Chapter 26:20. The saint's inheritance. Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned when he realized that he actually had 9 mirror images. Nie Tian, what's wrong? Feng Qi asked when he saw Nie Tian's sudden change in expression. Nie Tian nodded and told Feng Qi about his discovery. Feng Qi was stunned for a while after hearing Nie Tian's words. After a while, he laughed and said, "Doesn't that mean that I also have 9 mirror images in this Ghost Emperor's tomb?" Nie Tian frowned when he saw the excitement on Feng Qi's face. Nie Tian and Feng Qi did not stay any longer. They immediately left the place and headed toward another valley. For Nie Tian, the most important thing now was to find Jun Aoqing and the others as soon as possible. The 2 figures traversed through the woods and soon arrived outside a valley. "There's someone in the valley." As soon as Nie Tian landed, he heard the sounds of fighting coming from the mountain valley. He couldn't help but frown and put on a cautious expression. "I'll go take a look." Feng Qi nodded and dashed toward the valley. Nie Tian's gaze froze. He did not expect Feng Qi to be so impulsive. K-me. What's going on? Feng Qi arrived at the entrance of the valley and screamed when he saw the scene before him. Nie Tian arrived outside the valley and was stunned when he saw the scene before him. In the valley, dozens of cultivators were engaged in a chaotic battle. Waves of energy slammed against the cliffs of the mountain, as if the entire valley was about to collapse in an instant. In the air above the valley, a giant spear shadow floated. It was a few thousand meters long, like a giant standing in the sky, looking down at everything. The saint's inheritance. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment before he reacted and exclaimed. He could immediately tell that the shadow of the spear floating in the air was the legacy of a sage. It was obvious that the reason why these warriors were fighting to the death was to obtain the sage's inheritance. "The sage's inheritance is mine. Whoever dares to snatch it from me shall die." One of the cultivators roared angrily and his aura swelled up. His figure flashed and he flew towards the spear image in the air. Bang! However, just as his figure was in mid-air, he was struck by a terrifying palm shadow. With a muffled sound, he died immediately. A piece of trash wants to obtain the sage's inheritance? Wishful thinking. The person who killed the cultivator sneered. His eyes were extremely cold and berserk. Nie Tian watched from the side and couldn't help but frown. At this rate, it wouldn't take long for these people to kill each other. It's the spear Dao inheritance. At this moment, Feng Qi stared at the spear shadow in the void and said with a burning gaze, "Do you want it?" Nie Tian smiled faintly. He knew that Feng Qi was a spear user. The sage's inheritance in front of him might be very suitable for him. Feng Qi's eyes glowed faintly, but he shook his head and said, "Not interested." Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Feng Qi to say that. "The sage's inheritance is good, but I don't want it." Feng Qi smiled faintly and said, "The power of inheritance can allow a cultivator to increase their strength quickly and help them break through to a higher realm. However, the power of inheritance isn't one's own strength after all. Not only will it not improve the cultivator's future cultivation, but it will also be a hindrance. These people want to obtain the power of inheritance, but they can only see what's in front of them and not the future." When Nie Tian heard what Feng Qi said, he couldn't help but smile and said, "I didn't expect you to have such thoughts. It seems like I've underestimated you." Actually, Nie Tian had the same thoughts too. Therefore, he didn't care about the inheritance at all. For Feng Qi to have such thoughts, it meant that he had a big goal and was extremely ambitious. Since you're not interested in the power of inheritance, then leave. Then, Nie Tian smiled faintly and was ready to leave. Okay. Feng Qi nodded and was ready to leave too. Boom. But at this moment, the entire valley shook violently and started to collapse. Nie Tian frowned and was ready to leave immediately. Whether the people in the valley lived or died, it had nothing to do with him. He wouldn't care too much. But the next moment a strange scene happened. Since you're here, why are you in such a hurry to leave? In the valley, a deep voice suddenly rang out. It was a rumbling power that surged in the air. Nie Tian and Feng Qi were stunned and looked at the floating spear shadow. Boom! Just at this moment, the spear shadow suddenly trembled, and a terrifying force appeared, forming visible ripples in the air, like ripples surging out. Boom! 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 In the next moment, the terrifying power hit the entire valley. Suddenly, the valley looked like it was the end of the world. The mountains collapsed, the boulders shattered, and the turbid waves rose to the sky. The martial artists in the valley couldn't resist the impact of the power and screamed in pain. Retreat! Nie Tian sensed that something was wrong. He let out a low roar and tried to retreat. However, to his horror, he found that there seemed to be an extremely terrifying power surging in the air, tightly wrapping around him and making him unable to move a single inch. What's going on? Feng Qi's situation was the same as Nie Tian's. He screamed and panicked. The power in the air was terrifying. It was like an invisible giant hand that tightly trapped Nie Tian and Feng Qi. In the next moment, Nie Tian reacted and screamed. He looked at the floating spear shadow and said, "There's something wrong with the power of the inheritance." He felt that the invisible power in the air came from the inheritance in the air. Hua! At this moment, the spear shadow shook violently again. Then, a spear shadow appeared and whizzed towards the ground. The people in the valley were so scared that their faces turned pale. They couldn't even scream in pain. Oh no! Nie Tian frowned and screamed in his heart. Then, without hesitation, the star energy in his body surged out and broke through the invisible power. He stretched out his arm and pulled Feng Qi back 100 meters. Boom! At the moment when the two of them landed, the spear shadow also landed. Suddenly, the whole ground shook, as if the earth was about to collapse. Crack, crack, crack! In the next moment, a violent force spread out, and the ground around them split open. Gullies extended out like abysses. Boom, boom, boom! Explosions sounded in the surroundings. Everything within a radius of tens of thousands of meters collapsed and turned into wild waves that raged in the air. The dozens of martial artists were long gone. Under such terrifying destructive power, these martial artists would definitely end up with nothing left of them. Under the impact of the wild waves, Nie Tian and Feng Qi were sent flying thousands of meters away. Then, they landed heavily on the ground, leaving 2 bloody trails on the ground. This! Nie Tian immediately stood up. Looking at the scene of destruction in front of him, he was momentarily speechless. Feng Qi was even more shocked. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't make a sound. Luckily, Nie Tian acted in time and left the valley, avoiding the direct impact. Otherwise, Nie Tian and Feng Qi would have ended up the same as the martial artist. A kid who can resist the suppression of the saint energy. Interesting. At this moment, a deep voice suddenly rang out from the valley that was filled with turbid waves. It sounded extremely strange as it reverberated through the void. Nie Tian and Feng Qi's expressions flickered with astonishment. Chapter 26-21. The spear. Nie Tian and Feng Qi were stunned when they heard the voice coming from the valley. They even suspected that they had heard wrongly. Just now, a destructive scene had happened in the valley. How could there still be people inside? Nie Tian and Feng Qi were stunned for a few seconds before they reacted. Then, they subconsciously retreated. You two little fellows, since you are here, Why are you in such a hurry to leave? At that moment, in the valley where the dust billowed, a deep voice was heard again. It was filled with a chilling aura. After the voice was heard, Nye Tian and Feng Qi's retreating figures suddenly stopped. They could no longer take a step back. Damn it! Nye Tian bellowed and his eyes suddenly darkened. He once again felt the invisible force in the void. Moreover, it was even more terrifying than before. Even if he released the power of the stars, he could not move his body even half a step. You two children, you two are too weak. It is impossible for you to escape from me. In the valley, a cold voice was heard, and it was extremely evil. Nye Tian and Feng Qi's faces were gloomy and they were extremely embarrassed. They had no idea what was going on with the voice in the valley. They did not even know who the person in the valley was. However, they were certain that the person in the valley was extremely powerful. The two of them could not move at all. They could only watch in horror. After a long time, the dust in the void finally dispersed and the spear's shadow appeared in the sky again. At that moment, there was a shadow standing on top of the spear's shadow. It was a black-robed man. His facial features were handsome and sinister. Even though he was only a phantom, his eyes were extremely cold. At this moment, the black-robed man was staring unblinkingly at Nye Tian and Feng Qi. His eyes shone with the light of greed and desire. This is a remnant soul. Nye Tian looked at the man in black. His eyes trembled and he exclaimed in his heart. It was obvious that the voice just now was made by this man. As for the man, he was not a physical entity, but a remnant soul, just like the powerful Di Shi Tian and Jian Qinqi. But where did this remnant soul come from? There was no trace of this remnant soul in the valley just now. Kid, you're actually able to resist the suppression of saint energy? At this moment, the remnant soul stared at Nye Tian and said in surprise. Nye Tian became cold and asked, "Who exactly are you?" Just now, the power that the remnant soul used was the suppression of the saint power, which could suppress the yuan meridians of any warrior below the sage level. However, Nye Tian was able to break through the suppression of the saint power. It was unbelievable. The suppression of saint energy could indeed suppress any yuan meridian of a martial artist below the sage level. However, Nye Tian's 10th yuan meridian was the star origin stone, so it was not suppressed by any power. The remnant soul was stunned for a moment, as if he hadn't expected Nye Tian to be so calm and not panic in the slightest. Ha ha! Then, the remnant soul laughed abruptly and said, "You two are pretty good. My name is Lung Tsanshin." Lung Tsanshin. Hearing the name, Feng Qi's eyes trembled. He seemed to have thought of something and shouted, "You're the Spear Emperor Lung Tsanshin." Lung Tsanshin was surprised. He then looked at Feng Qi and said, "Kid, you actually know my name?" "Of course I know you." Feng Qi's face darkened and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. Nye Tian's expression changed when he saw Feng Qi's action. He didn't know what was wrong with him. In the next moment, Lung Tsanshin's gaze changed as well, as if he had sensed something. He looked at Feng Qi and said coldly, "Kid, you're from the Feng family?" "Yes," Feng Qi replied coldly. His eyes were bloodshot and it was obvious that he was furious. "The spear war god, Feng Yi. Who is he to you?" Lung Tsanshin was startled again and asked in a deep voice. "My grandfather," Feng Qi replied in a low voice, his eyes blazing with anger. "Humph." Hearing Feng Qi's answer, Lung Tsanshin sneered and said, "I didn't expect to meet the descendant of an old friend today. It seems that the fate between me and the Feng family is not shallow." Looking at the scene before him, Nye Tian seemed to understand something. It seemed that Lung Tsanshin was the enemy of the Feng family, which was why Feng Qi was so angry. "Kid, is your grandfather still alive? The curse of the cruel heart must be terrible." Then, Lung Tsanshin laughed and asked with a gloomy face, "Grandfather is still alive. Even if he can only sit in a wheelchair, it's still better than you being left with a remnant soul." Feng Qi roared coldly. He looked like he was going crazy. Feng Qi, calm down. Who is this person? Does he have any grudge against the Feng family? Nie Tian asked as he was worried that Feng Qi would be too impulsive. His name is Lung Sanxin, a top expert of the spear world from the frozen ruins over 100,000 years ago. People call him the evil emperor of the spear. Feng Qi calmed down and said in a deep voice, over 100,000 years ago, my grandfather was also a top expert of the spear world. People call him the spear war god. My grandfather and Lung Sanxin were known as the twin peaks of the spear world. However, Lung Sanxin challenged my grandfather to a duel in order to fight for the title of the best spear user. At that time, my grandfather was in the prime of his life. Of course, he was competitive, so he accepted Lung Sanxin's challenge. But who knew that Lung Sanxin would find my grandfather the night before the battle and secretly plant the heart-destroying bone curse on him? In the duel on the second day, my grandfather was defeated. He was severely injured and barely survived. Until now, my grandfather still has to endure the torture of the cruel heart-bone curse every day to prolong his life. He's living a life worse than death. Therefore, Lung Sanxin is the biggest enemy of the Feng family. After saying this, the murderous intent in Feng Qi's eyes grew thicker. Although it was his first time meeting Lung Sanxin, he had witnessed his grandfather being tortured every day. Upon hearing this, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown. This Lung Sanxin was even more vicious than the selfless sword demon, Qin Shohan. In order to obtain the title of the best spear user, Qin Shohan resorted to some dirty tricks and staged a duel between a disciple and his master. However, this method was not too despicable. In order to obtain the title of the best spear user, Lung Sanxin resorted to such an insidious method. How detestable! So what if he won the duel with such a method? Was this title of the best spear user really worthy of it? No wonder Feng Qi was so excited after hearing the name Lung Sanxin, as if he wanted to eat him alive. Lung Sanxin, you used such a despicable method. So what if you defeated my grandfather? At this time, Feng Qi suddenly laughed and said, aren't you still trapped in here? You're neither human nor ghost, living a life worse than death. Is that so? Lung Sanxin smiled coldly and glanced at Nie Tian and Feng Qi with a cold smile. He then said calmly, I was indeed trapped by this despicable force of inheritance. However, it's all good now. Thank God for sending you here. With the two of you, this remnant soul of mine can finally be reborn. Ah! Lung Sanxin couldn't help but burst out laughing. Chapter 26-22. Chapter 26-22. Chapter 26-22. A Battle of Life and Death. When Nie Tian heard Lung Sanxin's words, he couldn't help but frown, and at the same time, his heart sank. He could tell that Lung Sanxin was trapped in the saint's inheritance. So this saint's inheritance was a trap. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out and said solemnly, there's actually a powerful seal in the inheritance. Nie Tian was slightly taken aback and frowned. Fat Cat saw through Nie Tian's doubts and explained, this evil emperor must have wanted to fuse with the saint's inheritance, but who knew that there was a seal in the saint's inheritance that directly swallowed his body, leaving only a remnant soul, which was imprisoned in the inheritance. So that's how it is. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he understood. Fat Cat's guess was right. Lung Sanxin's body was indeed swallowed by the seal in the inheritance. 100,000 years ago, when the Ghost Emperor's tomb opened, Lung Sanxin entered the tomb in order to find the legendary saint's inheritance. He had painstakingly found the saint's inheritance in front of him, but when he was fusing with it, his body was swallowed by the seal in the inheritance, leaving only a remnant soul to live on in this world. The dignified evil emperor had fallen to such a state, it could only be said that evil had its retribution. At this time, Lung Sanxin was considering whose body he should occupy. As long as he could seize Nie Tian's or Feng Qi's body, He would be able to break through the seal and be reborn. For the past 100,000 years, he had been fighting against the seal every day and had already exhausted the seal. It was just that he needed a suitable body to be reborn in. Kid from the Feng family. After a while, Lung Sanxin's gaze locked onto Feng Qi. It was obvious that he had taken a fancy to the latter's martial body. He smiled coldly and said, "You really want to take revenge for Feng Yi, right? This emperor will give you a chance to take revenge today, how about it?" Feng Qi's gaze suddenly trembled, blazing with incomparable passion. Nie Tian, however, frowned and became more cautious. Actually, although Nie Tian and Feng Qi were controlled by Lung Sanxin, the current situation wasn't that bad. After all, Lung Sanxin was just a remnant soul. He did not have any power, so he could only rely on the power of inheritance. He was activating the power of inheritance, which was why he released the pressure of the saint energy. Lung Sanxin had used up a great deal of his mental strength just now. At this moment, it was impossible for him to release a second attack. Therefore, he couldn't do anything to Nie Tian and Feng Qi. As long as Nie Tian and Feng Qi could hold on for a little longer, they would be able to escape when Lung Sanxin's spirit power was almost used up. Nie Tian, don't be nervous. This guy is just a remnant soul. He doesn't have the ability to kill you. Fat Cat saw this and reminded Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded slightly, and his expression relaxed a lot. He wanted to know what other tricks Lung Sanxin had up his sleeves. "Lung Sanxin, what do you want? Just say it." Feng Qi said coldly, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. "Young man from the Feng clan, I know you're not convinced." Lung Sanxin's eyes quivered, and he said, "I'm willing to give you a fair fight. If you enter the inheritance, I'll have a soul fight with you. Are you willing?" Nie Tian heard what Lung Sanxin said, and he shouted, "Lung Sanxin, you're so despicable. You let Feng Qi enter the inheritance because you want to devour his soul." How could Nie Tian not know that Lung Sanxin was harboring evil intentions? The so-called soul fight was actually Lung Sanxin devouring Feng Qi's soul. Of course, if Feng Qi's soul was strong enough, he could also devour Lung Sanxin's soul. Back then, Nie Tian had almost devoured Sakra Heaven's discarnate soul. But Feng Qi was so young, so his soul must not be strong. As for Lung Sanxin, he was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if he was just a remnant soul, he was still unimaginably terrifying. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to survive in the inheritance for so long. "Young man, I'm giving him a chance to make a choice." Lung Sanxin looked at Nie Tian and said coldly, "Do you think it's possible for you to leave this place alive? Don't bluff." Nie Tianling laughed and said, "You're just a remnant soul, and you have no power at all. The attack just now has already weakened him. Right now, all you can do is trap us. We'll be able to leave when you're a little weaker." "Bastard, you!" Lung Sanxin's eyes quivered, and he was speechless. He obviously didn't expect that Nie Tian could see through all of this. He indeed didn't have the ability to kill Nie Tian and Feng Qi, otherwise he wouldn't have bothered to talk nonsense. "Feng Qi, all we need to do is wait patiently and leave." Nie Tian smiled faintly and said to Feng Qi, "Just leave him here and let him continue to live a life worse than death." Lung Sanxin's eyes froze when he heard Nie Tian's words. He had been trapped for hundreds of thousands of years, and Feng Qi was his only chance. If Feng Qi left, he would have to wait for at least another 100,000 years. But his remnant soul was very weak now, and it was impossible for him to hold on for another 100,000 years. Feng Qi's eyes were fixed, and his face was gloomy. He didn't speak for a long time. "Young man from the Feng clan, this is a good chance for you to take revenge. Do you really want to give up?" Lung Sanxin looked at Feng Qi and said earnestly, "Feng Qi, don't listen to him." Nie Tianling sneered and said in a low voice, "All right." But the next moment, Feng Qi suddenly raised his head and stared at Lung Sanxin fiercely. He said word by word, "I will fight with you." Nie Tian's face froze, and he looked at Feng Qi in disbelief. He didn't expect Feng Qi to make such a decision. How could his soul fight with Leng Sanxin? Isn't that courting death? But at this moment, Feng Qi's eyes were extremely determined. He said, "Leng Sanxin, I want you to know that the people of the Feng clan will never lose to you. All right." Leng Sanxin was stunned for a moment, and it took him a long time to react. He said with his eyes beaming, "Then let me see how powerful the people of the Feng clan are." "As you wish." Feng Qi roared, and his eyes were extremely determined. "All right." Leng Sanxin sneered. Then, the pressure of the saint power on Feng Qi disappeared. Feng Qi's body moved, and he flew towards the spear shadow. "Feng Qi!" Nie Tian exclaimed, but he couldn't stop it, because he was controlled by the saint power. "Nie Tian, trust me." Feng Qi was in midair, and he turned around to look at Nie Tian. Then, he moved and entered the spear shadow. "Haha, boy of the Feng clan, your martial body is mine now." Leng Sanxin let out a piercing laugh. Then, he moved and entered the spear shadow, and entered Feng Qi's divine sense. Instantly, Nie Tian felt that the invisible force in the void around him disappeared, and he regained his freedom. "Oh no." Looking at Feng Qi in midair, Nie Tian frowned and his face turned pale. But now, he had no choice but to stand aside and watch. At this moment there were two souls in Feng Qi's body. One was himself, and the other was Leng Sanxin. Two souls, a battle of life and death. Whoever wins, this martial body will belong to that person. Chapter 26-23. Chapter 26-23. Chapter 26-23. Two souls, When Nie Tian heard Little Fat Cat's words, he couldn't help but frown and ask, "Little Fat, what did you discover?" Nie Tian couldn't understand the decision that Feng Qi made previously. But now that he thought about it, Feng Qi was very calm just now. It didn't seem like he was acting on impulse. It seemed like he was very confident that he could defeat Leng Sanxin. Feng Qi wasn't an arrogant fool. He was a very smart person. There must be a reason for his decision. This feeling is very strange. I can't quite grasp it. Fat Cat hesitated and frowned. Nie Tian frowned and felt even more strange. Fat Cat couldn't be sure what he found. With Fat Cat's knowledge, there were very few things that he couldn't be sure about. "Nie Tian, I have a feeling that Kid Feng's soul is very strange. It's as if there are two souls living in his body." At this moment, the little Fat Cat finally spoke up, its expression extremely strange. "What do you mean?" Nie Tian was stunned. There are indeed two souls in Feng Qi's body now. One is himself, and the other is Leng Sanxin. "No." Fat Cat shook his head and said, "I feel that there are two souls in Feng Qi's body. It's just that one is the main soul and the other is the assistant soul. They seem to have merged together." This. Nie Tian heard Little Fat Cat's words and was stunned for a moment. "That's impossible, right?" Fat Cat shook his head and said, "I'm not sure either. Let's continue to observe." Nie Tian nodded and looked at Feng Qi with a burning gaze. He couldn't do anything about it now. He could only rely on Feng Qi himself. Feng Qi sat quietly in the middle of the spear shadows. He looked very calm on the surface, but inside his divine sense, he was carrying out the most intense confrontation. A moment later, Feng Qi frowned. His face contorted into a sinister expression as if he was in great pain. His entire body was drenched in cold sweat. "Feng Qi, you must win," Nie Tian prayed in his heart as he watched from the side. He couldn't do anything now. He didn't know what was happening in Feng Qi's body, so he could only watch. At this moment, Feng Qi suddenly let out a miserable howl, as if he was in great pain. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and his heart rose to his throat. However, Feng Qi slowly regained his composure. His expression became natural, and the cold sweat on his body dispersed. He sat there cross-legged, as if he was cultivating. The winner has been decided. The fat cat exclaimed in excitement. Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he stared at Feng Qi. He didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. He couldn't tell if the current Feng Qi was Feng Qi or Leng Sanxin. However, Feng Qi didn't wake up immediately. He sat there quietly and slowly absorbed the power of inheritance. Seeing this, Nie Tian's face darkened and he cried out inwardly, "Oh no!" He knew that Feng Qi didn't want to merge with the power of inheritance. But now, Feng Qi was merging with the power of inheritance. Did this mean that the current Feng Qi was no longer Feng Qi but Leng Sanxin? Not necessarily. The fat cat's voice was heard once again. The seal in the inheritance has almost been consumed by the evil emperor. Right now, the inheritance is just a pure power. It's normal for Kid Feng to absorb this force to improve his strength. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He hoped that what the fat cat said was true. About half an hour later, the power of inheritance around Feng Qi was completely absorbed. At this moment, Feng Qi opened his eyes and stood up. He was like a spear that pierced through the heavens, sharp beyond compare. Gulp. Nie Tian gulped and stared at Feng Qi. He could sense that the latter's aura was much stronger than before. It seemed that he had reached the half-peak of the martial arts realm. Moreover, the spear intent around Feng Qi's body was also very powerful. Threads of it flowed endlessly. Feng Qi, Nie Tian took a step forward and called out to Feng Qi. He wasn't sure if the person in front of him was Feng Qi or Leng Sanxin. Feng Qi smiled faintly. He looked at Nie Tian and said, "Nie Tian, I won." Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he sensed the familiar look in her eyes, and his heart finally relaxed. The person in front of him was not Leng Sanxin, but Feng Qi. Then, Feng Qi moved and landed next to Nie Tian. Nie Tian felt the aura of Feng Qi and was extremely shocked. Feng Qi's martial arts strength had reached the half-peak of the martial arts realm, and his spear art had reached the legendary realm of combining spear and martial arts. Nie Tian estimated that Feng Qi's combat strength was no weaker than a martial artist at the peak of the immortal state. After absorbing the power of inheritance, Feng Qi had almost a qualitative improvement. "I can't believe you really won." Nie Tian looked at Feng Qi and couldn't help but shake his head in amazement. Feng Qi's improvement was within his expectations, but he was really curious how Feng Qi defeated Leng Sanxin. Leng Sanxin was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. "I was just lucky." Feng Qi smiled faintly and didn't say much. Instead, he said in his heart, "Nie Tian, this secret of mine can only be known by myself. I really can't tell you. I'm sorry." In fact, Feng Qi always had a secret in his heart. This secret was only known by himself, and he would never tell anyone in his life. Fat Cat's guess was right. There were indeed two souls in Feng Qi's body, and the two souls were perfectly integrated. One of them, Feng Qi, was from the myriad realms, and the other, Feng Qi, was a soul from another world. The power of the two souls helped Feng Qi defeat Leng Sanxin. This was his biggest secret. Leng Sanxin poisoned Feng Qi's grandfather in order to become the first spear shooter. But now, he had been defeated by Feng Qi and completely disappeared from this world. This could be considered as repaying the debt of gratitude and karma. After a while, Nie Tian became cold. He was really happy for Feng Qi. He knew that Feng Qi must be hiding a secret, but it didn't affect their friendship. Nie Tian also had a bunch of secrets that only he knew. "Nie Tian, let's go to the Hanya Valley now." At this moment, Feng Qi looked at Nie Tian and said with a faint smile. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately understood. Feng Qi had devoured Leng Sanxin's soul and inherited a part of the latter's memory. Leng Sanxin was someone who had explored the Ghost Emperor's tomb, so he was very familiar with everything there. The Hanya Valley that Feng Qi mentioned was a cold valley. There were many sages' inheritances there, and it was the place where most martial artists gathered after entering the Ghost Emperor's tomb. Nie Tian was currently looking for Jun Aoqing, but he didn't have any clues. Going to the Hanya Valley with Feng Qi might be a good choice. He might be able to find Jun Aoqing there. Then, the two of them didn't delay any further and headed straight for the Hanya Valley. They didn't stop along the way. Half an hour later, Nie Tian and Feng Qi arrived at the edge of a long and narrow valley, which was none other than the Frostfang Valley. The two of them didn't hesitate and prepared to enter the valley. Bang! But at this moment, a terrifying muffled sound rang out from afar, as if two forces had collided. Someone is fighting! Nie Tian and Feng Qi looked at each other, and then looked up at the sky at the same time. High up in the sky, two figures were standing, both releasing a violent aura. Let's go take a look. Nie Tian had a feeling that the two figures were somewhat familiar. With these words, he leapt into the air and flew towards them. In the blink of an eye, he was tens of thousands of meters away from the two figures, and he could finally see their faces clearly. At this moment, Nie Tian was stunned. He was very familiar with one of the two faces. It was Yin Tianyi. The other face was even more familiar. It was him. Chapter 26-24. A terrifying battle. Nie Tian looked at the two figures in the sky and couldn't react for a long time. Nie Tian, that person is you. Feng Qi was also stunned for a long time before he finally opened his mouth. His voice was trembling and his face was full of disbelief. Yeah. Nie Tian nodded, the corners of his mouth curling up as a strange light shone in his eyes. Of course, he knew that the person fighting with Yin Tianyi was his mirror image created by the door of the Ghost Emperor. He really wanted to know how strong his mirror image was. At this time, the battle in the sky was very intense. Yin Tianyi, you are dead. Nie Tian's mirror image laughed coldly, his eyes flickering with a cold light. His eyes were so dark and evil that they made people shudder with fear. Nie Tian, do you have the ability to kill me? Yin Tianyi didn't seem to know that the Nie Tian in front of him was fake. He sneered cold and was full of battle intent. Humph! Nie Tian's mirror image laughed grimly as he took a step forward. Sword intent burst forth from his entire body, causing the void behind him to tremble violently, as if the entire heaven and earth were shaking along with it. This guy has such a terrifying aura. Nie Tian looked from afar and felt the aura of the mirror image Nie Tian. He couldn't help but be shocked. He felt that the aura of the mirror image Nie Tian seemed to be more terrifying than his real body. Maybe it was because the mirror image Nie Tian was created by the door of the Ghost Emperor. His aura could perfectly fit with the surrounding space. It was as if the surrounding force of heaven and earth was integrated into his sword aura. It was extremely terrifying. This mirror image seems to be stronger than you. Feng Qi was also shocked and said, Yin Tianyi felt the aura of the mirror image of Nie Tian, and his eyes narrowed. He couldn't hide his surprise, but then he smiled and said, Nie Tian, I didn't expect your strength to improve so much in just a few days. He clearly did not expect that the aura of the mirror image Nie Tian would actually be so terrifying. Die! The mirror image Nie Tian didn't waste any words and directly attacked. The starry heaven slashed down furiously. The sword light was like a waterfall blooming with light, falling from the sky and killing towards Yin Tianyi. When Yin Tianyi saw the situation, he did not dare to be careless. The wind and fire, 9 opposing forces in his hand, pierced out. The terrifying sword intent was like a raging wave, whizzing out. He was a wind and fire dual elemental swordsman. In his sword intent, there was not only the fierceness of fire, but also the swiftness of wind. The sword essence in the void instantly condensed into a flaming sword shadow. It was like a burning tornado, roaring. Boom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided with a loud bang in the sky. Waves of terrifying power spread and wreaked havoc in the space. The mirror images of Nie Tian and Yin Tianyi were directly drowned by the violent sword intent, vanishing from sight. Nie Tian and Feng Qi watched by the side, their expressions extremely shocked. Nie Tian didn't expect that his own mirror image was actually so terrifying. After a long time, the violent sword intent waves dissipated. The figures of the mirror images Nie Tian and Yin Tianyi appeared, standing in the void. The aura of the two people was still violent, and they were not injured. Yin Tianyi's gaze was heavy, feeling very strange in his heart. He could feel that Nie Tian's strength seemed to have increased a lot compared to 10 days ago. In a head-on clash, he actually could not gain the upper hand at all. This was very strange, making Yin Tianyi unable to figure it out. Just over 10 days, how could Nie Tian's strength possibly improve so quickly? Could it be that this guy obtained the inheritance of a saint after entering the Ghost Emperor remains? Yin Tianyi's brows furrowed, secretly guessing in his heart. He could only think of this reason for Nie Tian's strength to improve so quickly in a short time. Yin Tianyi, you're dead for sure today. The mirror image Nie Tian smiled coldly, his expression extremely sinister. It seemed like the mirror image Nie Tian not only obtained all of Nie Tian's strength, but also greatly magnified the dark and sinister side in Nie Tian's personality. Arrogant! Yin Tianyi was thoroughly enraged. With a low roar, the Windfire 9 Defiances attacked once more, slashing over wildly towards the mirror image Nie Tian. High up in the sky, two figures were locked in a fierce battle. The two people's figures could no longer be seen in the sky. There was only a terrifying sword intent wreaking havoc crazily. The sword's shadows were like sharp blades, roaring and roaring. When Nie Tian and Feng Qi saw this scene, their hearts were incomparably shocked. The mirror image Nie Tian and Yin Tianyi were both very powerful. Under the clash of strength, they were actually evenly matched. Nie Tian thought to himself that if he were to encounter his own mirror image, he might be at a disadvantage. In a moment, the mirror image Nie Tian and Yin Tianyi exchanged dozens of swords. The surrounding tens of thousands of meters of space was filled with sword intent, incomparably violent. He's exhausting Yin Tianyi's strength. At this time, Nie Tian suddenly thought of something. His gaze trembled slightly as he said solemnly, "What?" Feng Qi was stunned for a moment, not quite understanding what Nie Tian meant. In the Ghost Emperor's tomb, these mirror images can directly absorb energy from space. Nie Tian frowned and said solemnly, "That mirror image is exhausting Yin Tianyi's strength bit by bit, then waiting for an opportunity to defeat him with one sword." This. Feng Qi was stunned and did not know what to say. Who would have thought that a mirror image would actually be so scheming? When Nie Tian was battling with Huang Fu Hong's mirror image previously, the latter had once directly absorbed energy from space with strange means. Bam! At this time, the mirror image Nie Tian and Yin Tianyi exchanged swords again, then the two figures separated and stabilized themselves. Nie Tian, I have to admit that you have indeed become stronger. Yin Tianyi's gaze was gloomy as he said cold, but it's a pity that your opponent is me. So today there is only one path in front of you, and that is death. After finishing his words, Yin Tianyi's entire aura surged violently. Surges of sword intent were extremely violent, making him look extremely ruthless. Yin Tianyi has activated the sword vein in his body. Nie Tian saw this scene from afar. His gaze trembled and he almost screamed. Yin Tianyi's aura at this time was much stronger than before. It was obvious that he had activated the 9Ni sword vein. Nie Tian, your mirror image is about to be finished. Feng Qi's gaze also trembled as he said in horror. He had personally experienced the 9Ni sword vein before, of course. He knew how terrifying its power was. He estimated that Nie Tian's mirror image would not be able to contend against Yin Tianyi's 9Ni sword light. Nie Tian's eyes were burning at this time, but he did not speak. But in his heart, he had a different view. Nie Tian's own mirror image, He knew best how strong it was. He even felt that the mirror image's strength was even greater than his own. So, the true strength of Nie Tian's mirror image had yet to be revealed. A mere inborn sword vein, and you want to kill me? The mirror image Nie Tian stood in the void, feeling Yin Tianyi's sword aura, but there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, it was very cold and even disdainful. The next moment, his body trembled, and the surrounding sword intent surged out. Then, a strange scene happened. Violent energy surged out from the void continuously and surged into the mirror image Nie Tian's body. Chapter 26-25. Time to die, damn. Why is your mirror image so strong? From afar, Feng Qi sensed the powerful aura of sword intent rushing towards him. His eyes trembled involuntarily, his face filled with shock. Nie Tian furrowed his eyebrows and stared at his own mirror image, his eyes shining brightly. He knew that mirror image Nie Tian could increase his strength by absorbing the energy in the space. But he didn't expect it to be this huge. Yin Tianyi also felt how terrifying mirror image Nie Tian was. He narrowed his eyes and there was a tinge of fear in them. But at this point, he had no way out. He could only fight with his life on the line. 9Ni sword vein, sword against the sky. In the next moment, Yin Tianyi let out a low roar. The violent sword intent in his body moved in an instant, after which, the space around him trembled as his sword intent condensed together. It was like a fire dragon that rushed down. Suddenly, the void was filled with violent flames. It was as if the entire world had turned into a sea of fire. At the same time, mirror image Nie Tian moved as well. The starry heaven slashed across the void, and a blinding sword radiance bloomed. Then, the shadow of the sword appeared. It was as huge as a mountain and oppressed the void. It was terrifying. At this moment, Nie Tian frowned and his expression was one of extreme shock. Of course, he could tell that mirror image Nie Tian was using the second form of three opposing heavens, earth sword engulfed. And the sword aura that mirror image Nie Tian was using was the sword aura of the celestial demon. In other words, mirror image Nie Tian not only inherited Nie Tian's sword technique, but also the celestial demon embryo. The door of the ghost emperor was too scary. It could replicate anything. Boom. Boom. At this moment, the two huge shadows in the void were like two moving mountains. They clashed madly. Kaboom. In the next moment, the two sword shadows finally collided with each other like raging dragons. The void shook violently, as if everything had come to a standstill for a moment. Boom, boom, boom. In the next instant, boundless power spread out in all directions. The violent force slammed into the void, and even the world seemed to be trembling. Nie Tian and Feng Qi were tens of thousands of meters away. Sensing the terrifying impact, their expressions changed again and again. Chi chi chi. High up in the sky, ear-piercing noises continuously rang out, as if the world was about to be destroyed. Bang! Bang! A moment later, two muffled sounds rang out, and two figures flew out, leaving bloody trails in the air. Nie Tian and Feng Qi took a closer look. Those two figures were the mirror images of Nie Tian and Yin Tianyi. Two blood-colored figures were sent flying thousands of meters away before they managed to stabilize themselves. The mirror image of Nie Tian was drenched in blood. It was obvious that he was heavily injured, but his eyes were cold and bloodthirsty, filled with killing intent. On the other hand, Yin Tianyi's injuries were even more serious. His body was badly mutilated, and blood gushed out incessantly. Nie Tian and Feng Qi saw this scene, and their eyes trembled uncontrollably. Neither of them expected that this battle would be so tragic. In particular, the combat power shown by the mirror image of Nie Tian was shocking. Feng Qi originally thought that after Yin Tianyi opened the 9Ni sword vein, mirror image Nie Tian would not be able to resist. But he never thought that mirror image Nie Tian not only withstood the attack of the 9Ni sword vein, but also seriously injured Yin Tianyi. "In Tianyi, your time is up." At this time, mirror image Nie Tian roared. His body shook, and the blood stains on his body were washed away. His aura actually recovered a lot. He was the mirror image of Nie Tian. Not only did he inherit Nie Tian's combat power, but he also inherited Nie Tian's martial body. That clash of swords just now had caused him great harm. But he could directly absorb energy from the space, so he could recover instantly. On the other hand, In Tianyi was in a very sorry state. His body trembled slightly, as if he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. "How is this possible? How can your strength be so strong?" In Tianyi's eyes trembled, and he looked at mirror image Nie Tian's eyes with unconcealable fear and dread. He never dreamed that the outcome of this battle would be like this. "Humph." Mirror image Nie Tianlong laughed twice and said solemnly, "Things that you can't understand, then leave it for after you die to think about it." Finishing, his figure moved, and he directly rushed towards In Tianyi. But at this time, the void suddenly trembled, and then an unexpected figure appeared. Mirror image Nie Tian's figure paused, and he turned around to look at the figure that suddenly appeared, and his face suddenly darkened. In Tianyi was stunned at first, and then he looked at the figure, and he was directly stunned on the spot. That figure that suddenly appeared was actually himself. In Tianyi was petrified on the spot, unable to say a word for a long time. He even suspected that his eyes saw wrongly, or that he had fallen into some kind of illusion. But everything in front of his eyes was so real. In Tianyi's mirror image. Nie Tian saw the scene above the sky far away, and his eyes involuntarily focused, and he exclaimed in his heart. Of course, he knew that the In Tianyi that appeared at this moment was In Tianyi's mirror image. It was just that he did not know how this mirror image's strength compared to In Tianyi's original body. And when mirror image Nie Tian and mirror image In Tianyi met, what exactly would happen? "Are you going to intervene?" At this time, mirror image Nie Tian looked at mirror image In Tianyi, and spoke coldly. "I'm here to save you." Mirror image In Tianyi smiled strangely, and then looked at In Tianyi and said, "His strength is not just this little." In Tianyi was stunned for a moment, and forced himself to calm down. Looking at mirror image In Tianyi, he asked, "You, who exactly are you?" "Who am I?" Mirror image In Tianyi laughed, and then his figure moved, and he landed and said, "I am you." "Impossible!" In Tianyi roared, and his entire person was about to go crazy. "In Tianyi, your true strength is not just this little, right?" Mirror image In Tianyi laughed again and said, "Even at this time, you still want to hide your strength. You." In Tianyi was stunned for a moment, and his eyes trembled. He was extremely shocked, and he shouted, "How do you know?" "I already said, I am you." Mirror image In Tianyi smiled faintly and said, "How can I not know about my own matters?" In Tianyi's face froze, and he could not say a word for a long time. He did not expect that the person in front of him, who had the same appearance and aura as him, could actually see that he was hiding his strength. Nie Tian and Feng Qi looked at the scene from afar, and they were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other, and they were extremely shocked. In Tianyi actually hid his strength, and this was something that Nie Tian and Feng Qi could never have imagined. "He has already been defeated by me, what strength does he still have?" At this time, mirror image Nie Tian let out a low roar and said coldly, "Don't be anxious." Mirror image In Tianyi's lips curled into an evil smile, and he stared at In Tianyi and said faintly, "In Tianyi, you are about to die, why don't you release the power of the selfless sword seal?" In Tianyi's eyes trembled, and his expression was extremely shocked. Chapter 26. Chapter 266. Chapter 266 Selfless Sword Seal. In Tianyi stood rooted to the ground for a few seconds. His eyes slowly turned from surprise to ruthlessness and killing intent. "Huh!" The mirror image Nie Tian noticed that In Tianyi's expression was strange. He frowned and said in his heart, Did this guy really hide his strength? Since you know, then I won't hide it anymore. At this moment, Yin Tianyi suddenly let out a furious roar. His body shuddered violently, and a tremendous aura burst into the sky. The blood stains on his body disappeared instantly, and a terrifying murderous intent was emitted from his body. His aura actually increased by a few times in an instant. Boom, boom, boom. Yin Tianyi's body constantly released a terrible power. It was as if in his body, a wild beast that had been sleeping for a long time suddenly woke up. He really hid his strength. The mirror image Nye Tian saw this and his figure moved slightly. Then he retreated 1,000 meters away. He looked at Yin Tianyi with a face of surprise. Yin Tianyi's aura, compared to just now, not only did it not weaken, but it became several times stronger. It was very scary. He really couldn't understand why Yin Tianyi, who was already seriously injured, could still burst out such a terrible aura. Selfless Sword Seal finally opened. The mirror image Yin Tianyi was very calm. He smiled faintly and said, Yin Tianyi, your teacher is really good to you. He is willing to share such a terrible power with you. It's a pity that this is not your power after all. I can't inherit it. Yin Tianyi's aura rose wildly. His long hair flew in the air. He seemed to be crazy and extremely scary. The power he was using now came from a seal in his body, Selfless Sword Seal. And this seal was left in his body by his teacher, Selfless Sword Demon Qin Shohan. Qin Shohan warned Yin Tianyi that he must not use the Selfless Sword Seal unless it was a life and death moment. The power of the Selfless Sword Seal was too strong. Even if it was just the power of a sword seal, it was enough to make Yin Tianyi's strength have a qualitative leap. It was because the Selfless Sword Seal was too strong. Once Yin Tianyi used it, he would be in a very weak state for a few days. In fact, just now, Yin Tianyi had been thinking about whether to use the Selfless Sword Seal. The sudden appearance of mirror image Yin Tianyi forced him to use it. Because the Selfless Sword Seal was not Yin Tianyi's own power, the mirror image Yin Tianyi did not inherit the power of the Sword Seal. Turns out that there's still such a terrifying power in this fellow's body. Nye Tian looked at Yin Tianyi from afar, and his gaze involuntarily trembled as he exclaimed in his heart. He could also tell that the power that Yin Tianyi released did not belong to him, but came from someone else. Qin Shohan was truly despicable. He had Yin Tianyi fight on his behalf, and he even left such a powerful energy in Yin Tianyi's body. Fortunately, when Yin Tianyi was fighting with Feng Qi, he did not use the Selfless Sword Seal. Otherwise, Feng Qi would definitely be dead. You forced me to do this. At this moment, Yin Tianyi let out a wild roar. His entire person was like a wild beast. His eyes swept across the mirror image Nye Tian and mirror image Yin Tianyi, and he said coldly, Today, both of you will die. As his violent voice fell, Yin Tianyi took a step forward, and the wind and fire 9 inverse swords slashed down. Boom! Suddenly, the void shook violently, and an incomparably violent sword shadow appeared, slashing towards Nye Tian's mirror image. Mirror image Nye Tian reacted very quickly. Wings of Star Soul appeared on his back. With a flap of the wings, he instantly retreated 1,000 meters away, avoiding the frontal attack of the sword shadow. Pung! But he was still affected by the sword shadow's violent waves. His body shook violently and he flew out. Pft! Mirror image Nye Tian stabilized his body, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Yin Tianyi's power was too strong. The power of the sword was enough to kill him in an instant. Fortunately, he retreated in time. Otherwise, if he was hit by the sword shadow head-on, he would definitely die. Nye Tian watched from afar, and his eyes were filled with shock. He estimated that Yin Tianyi's combat power was already close to that of a half-sage. Qin Shohan was indeed terrifying. Just the power of a single sword mark was enough to make Yin Tianyi's strength so heaven-defying. This Yin Tianyi is indeed very strong. Feng Qi, who was at the side, was also shocked. But then he smiled and said, "Let these three guys fight. When all three of them are injured, then we will make a move and reap the benefits." Nie Tian smiled faintly. That was exactly what he was thinking. Yin Tianni, mirror image Nie Tian, mirror image Yin Tianni, these three people were all very strong. Nie Tian and Feng Qi only needed to quietly watch the battle now. After the three of them finished fighting, they would come out to clean up the mess. Yin Tianni, let me tell you how to use the 9 inverse sword range. At this moment, mirror image Yin Tianni's voice came from the sky. His figure moved, and his entire body's sword intent was released violently. At this moment, mirror image Yin Tianni actually activated the 9 inverse sword range. 9 inverse sword range. Yin Tianni was stunned for a moment and then he shouted, "Who are you? Why do you have the 9 inverse sword range?" Mirror image Yin Tianni smiled cold, but did not speak. The sword intent continued to surge wildly. Nie Tian and Feng Qi felt the aura of mirror image Yin Tianni, and they couldn't help but frown. After mirror image Yin Tianni activated the 9 inverse sword range, he was even scarier than the previous Yin Tianni. Yin Tianni, to be able to die under your own 9 inverse sword range, this should be an honor for you. Mirror image Yin Tianni smiled cold, and then he slashed down with his sword. The void rumbled, and a sword shadow of nearly 10,000 meters appeared, squeezing the space and falling down. "Arrogant!" Yin Tianni roared, and similarly slashed down with his sword. Endless flames appeared, and the sword shadow tumbled like a sea of fire. Boom! Boom! The two sword shadows were equally terrifying, like two fire dragons, roaring. Kaboom! In the next moment the two sword shadows collided, and the void suddenly trembled. In the next moment there was an endless wave of flames. Suddenly, the space within tens of thousands of meters was completely turned into a sea of fire. Chi chi chi. Waves of flames tumbled, like a flaming beast, swallowing terrifying tongues of fire, as though it was going to burn everything. Yin Tianni and mirror image Yin Tianni were drowned by the endless waves of flames at the same time, and disappeared without a trace. Nie Tian felt the blazing aura, and he couldn't help but frown, and his eyes were filled with surprise. This clash of swords was really terrifying, and beyond imagination. "These two guys are dead, right?" Feng Qi's eyes were dull, and he said in astonishment. "Huh!" At this moment, Nie Tian's eyes suddenly froze, and his face suddenly changed. He then turned around and looked at the void. At the place where his eyes landed, a figure stood, and at this moment, he was staring at him with incomparable coldness. Nie Tian's face was gloomy, and he also stared at the other party. At this moment, the person he was facing was not someone else, but his own mirror image. Nie Tian and mirror image Nie Tian looked at each other, and both pairs of eyes were equally cold and murderous. "Damn! I've been discovered!" At this moment, Feng Qi suddenly reacted, and couldn't help but scream. Chapter 26-27. Chapter 26-27. The BEGINNNG greeting gift in the void. Nie Tian and his mirror image looked at each other. The atmosphere was very strange. "You're actually not surprised to see me." At this time, the mirror image Nie Tian opened his mouth. His eyes were very evil, as if there was the deepest darkness hidden in them. He didn't expect that when Nie Tian saw him. He wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he was very calm. "You're just a mirror image. Why should I be surprised?" Nie Tian smiled faintly and looked calm. Mirror image Nie Tian heard Nie Tian's words and couldn't help but be surprised. He said in a deep voice, "You're really smart. You understand so quickly." "Same here." Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "If I'm not wrong, you're a mirror image created by the 9th door of the Ghost Emperor, right?" The mirror image Nie Tian in front of him must be created by the 9th door of the Ghost Emperor. Otherwise, he couldn't be so strong. Hee. Mirror image Nye Tian laughed and said, "Is this what you know about the door of the Ghost Emperor?" Nye Tian went blank for a moment before his heart sank. It seemed that the door of the Ghost Emperor was more complicated than he thought. Could it be that there were other mysteries? Those two guys are not dead. At this moment, Feng Qi suddenly screamed and looked into the sky. Nye Tian frowned and turned to look. He saw Yin Tianyi and mirror image Yin Tianyi standing in the sky. However, the two of them were very miserable. Their bodies were covered in blood. Obviously, their injuries were not light. In the collision just now, it was already unbelievable that these two guys could survive. Even if Yin Tianyi used the power of the selfless sword seal, he could only fight with mirror image Yin Tianyi until both of them were injured. Yin Tianyi, the power of your sword seal has been used up. Wait for your death. Mirror image Yin Tianyi sneered and his eyes were cold. Yin Tianyi's expression was ugly. Then, he turned around and saw Nye Tian and Feng Qi. What's going on? When he saw the two Nye Tians, his eyes flickered, and the astonishment in his heart was written all over his face. First, there was a person who looked exactly like him, and then there were two Nye Tian. What was going on? Yin Tianyi was in a complete mess. He could not figure out everything in front of him. Nye Tian, take care of your own problems. Leave those two to me. At this moment, Feng Qi let out a laugh. Then, his body moved and he flew towards the location where Yin Tianyi was at. He left Nye Tian's mirror image to Nye Tian and went to deal with Yin Tianyi and his mirror image Yin Tianyi. Yin Tianyi, your enemy is here. Let him kill you. The mirror image Yin Tianyi saw Feng Qi rushing over and smiled cold. After which, he absorbed energy from the space and recovered some of his strength before leaving. Yin Tianyi's eyes darkened, and his expression was very ugly. Feng Qi's figure landed and came to a place less than 1,000 meters away from Yin Tianyi. He looked at the latter with a playful gaze and said with a chuckle, "Yin Tianyi, your mirror image is quite smart. He just slipped away." Mirror image? Yin Tianyi was stunned for a moment, and his face was filled with horror. He had no idea what Feng Qi was talking about. Feng Qi smiled faintly. He was not in a hurry to kill Yin Tianyi, but explained to the latter instead. On the other side, Nye Tian and the mirror image Nye Tian were facing each other. Both of them were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, the mirror image Nye Tian was slightly injured, but he had no intention of leaving. He seemed to want to fight with Nye Tian. "Make your move." Nye Tian did not waste any time. He smiled cold and said directly, "Nye Tian, in the Ghost Emperor's tomb, you are no match for me." The mirror image Nye Tianling smiled coldly. Then, his entire body surged with sword intent. It was extremely violent, as though it could tear the void apart. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was secretly surprised. This guy was injured just now, but he can still release such a powerful sword intent. He is indeed powerful. Human sword, / At the next moment, the mirror image Nye Tianling spoke coldly. He roared and / slashed down from the sky. A terrifying sword light bloomed, and the brilliance of the sword shot out 10,000 meters away. Boom! The shadow of the sword was like a mountain, crashing down and pressing down on Nye Tian. At this moment, Nye Tian felt the enormous pressure of the sword, and he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. At this moment, he only knew how terrifying his sword technique was. Even he felt that it was difficult to bear such sword pressure. Human sword, / The next moment, Nye Tian's eyes flickered, and he also roared and slashed with his sword. This sword made Nye Tian feel a little excited. To be able to fight with himself, this kind of experience was not often seen. Boom! Boom! The same sword technique, the same sword shadow, collided with each other. Boom! In an instant, the two sword shadows fell, and the void suddenly shook. Suddenly, terrifying waves rushed out and surged in the void. Nye Tian was hit by the waves, and his figure was slightly retreating. Chi chi chi. The two sword shadows confronted each other in the air, and ear-piercing sounds could be heard. The aura of the sword intent was extremely violent. The strength of the mirror image Nyetian was indeed terrifying. Even though he was injured, he could still fight on par with Nyetian. Bang! Bang! At this moment, the two sword shadows finally couldn't take it anymore. They swayed at the same time and suddenly collapsed. Nyetian's figure retreated for another 1,000 meters, and then he immediately steadied himself. Looking at the mirror image Nyetian, he also retreated for 1,000 meters. Nyetian, your strength is just as so. The mirror image Nyetian steadied himself, and the corner of his mouth pulled up into a cold smile. He said coldly, "This sword is a greeting gift for you. The next time we meet, it will be a moment of life and death." After that, the wings of Astral Soul appeared behind him, and he directly left. Nyetian looked at the direction where the mirror image left, but he didn't chase after it. The sword just now made him quite afraid. The strength of the mirror image Nyetian was indeed stronger than he expected. Nyetian, you have to be careful next. The strength of this mirror image is stronger than you. At this moment, the voice of Fat Cat sounded, and she said with a low face. Nyetian nodded slightly, and his heart was silent. Even if he didn't understand, he had to admit that the battle strength of the mirror image Nyetian was indeed above him. What was more terrifying was that the mirror image Nyetian was more ruthless, and he wouldn't show any mercy when he attacked. Under normal conditions, Nyetian was most likely not the opponent of the mirror image Nyetian. At this time, the reason why the mirror image Nyetian left must be because he was injured, and there was still Feng Qi on the other side. Then, Nyetian no longer thought about the mirror image Nyetian, but looked at Feng Qi, and his gloomy and stern eyes locked on Yin Tianyi. His figure moved, and instantly came to the side of Feng Qi and Yin Tianyi. That guy is the mirror image created by the door of Ghost Emperor? Yin Tianyi, at this time, looked horrified, and only reacted after a long time, and said dumbly. Feng Qi had already told him about the door of Ghost Emperor. He then understood why the mirror image Yin Tianyi would know about the selfless sword seal. Although the mirror image Yin Tianyi did not inherit the power of the selfless sword seal, but he knew about this matter. Yin Tianyi, I have already told you about the mirror image. This is to let you die with a little more understanding. At this time, Feng Qi smiled coldly, and looked at Yin Tianyi with cold eyes and said, "Next, do you have anything to say? You want to kill me?" Yin Tianyi was stunned, and felt the murderous intention that seemed to be real, and his face was extremely frightened. He had just used the selfless sword seal, and was also seriously injured by the mirror image Yin Tianyi. At this time, he was already very weak, and had no ability to resist. If Nyetian and Feng Qi wanted to kill him, it would be a piece of cake. What do you think? Feng Qi smiled cold, and his murderous intention was heavy. Chapter 26-28. The bloody hand reappeared when Feng Qi's voice fell. He immediately took a step out. The killing intent in his body was incomparably thick, almost condensing into a substance, like an invisible big hand, enveloping Yin Tianyi. Don't kill me." Yin Tianyi felt the aura of death approaching. His pupils suddenly constricted, and he screamed in horror. Humph humph. Feng Qi smiled coldly, walked over step by step, and said, "Yin Tianyi, can you give me a reason not to kill you?" I. Yin Tianyi's voice trembled. His tongue was already spinning, and he could not speak. Nyetian watched quietly by the side, very calm. At this time, Feng Qi already came to a place less than 10 meters away from Yin Tianyi. As long as he released his aura, he could directly oppress Yin Tianyi to death. "I've seen someone before." Yin Tianyi's pupils trembled, but he suddenly shouted and looked at Nyetian. Nyetian was stunned for a moment, and did not bother about Yin Tianyi. "It's that girl beside you." Yin Tianyi shouted again, looked at Nyetian and shouted, "I know where she is?" And, hearing Yin Tianyi's words, Nyetian's gaze darkened, and his expression changed. He directly took a step out and asked with a low roar, "Where is she?" Of course, he knew that the person Yin Tianyi was talking about was Jun Aoqing. Previously, when fighting with Yin Tianyi, Jun Aoqing was also present. He had been looking for Jun Aoqing all along. At this moment, Yin Tianyi said that he knew of Jun Aoqing's news. How could he not be excited? Feng Qi was also stunned for a moment, his figure stagnated, and stiffened for a moment. Yin Tianyi looked at Nie Tian, his eyes flickered, and said, "I'll bring you to find her. You guys can't kill me, and you have to protect me." He had just used the selfless sword seal, and now he was very weak, and in the next few days, he would be in a weak state. The Ghost Emperor's tomb was extremely dangerous. In his current state, it was impossible for him to survive. He needed someone to protect him. Nie Tian and Feng Qi were strong enough to protect him. "Speak, where is it?" Nie Tian completely ignored Yin Tianyi's request. With a low roar, a terrifying killing intent was released from his body, enveloping Yin Tianyi. "Agree to my request. Otherwise, I won't say it even if I die." Yin Tianyi was actually not afraid at this moment, as he said solemnly. He knew that this was his only chance to survive, so he had to persevere to the end. "I promise you." Nie Tian frowned. Without hesitation, he agreed and growled, "Speak, where is he?" "All right, I'll bring you to look for him right now." Yin Tianyi's eyes lit up when he got Nie Tian's promise. Nie Tian nodded and glanced at Feng Qi. "Let's keep this guy alive for now. Finding him is more important." Feng Qi nodded and said with a faint smile. At this moment, many martial artists appeared in midair. They were all people from the Frost Tooth Valley. When they heard the battle, they all ran out. Nie Tian and the others ignored these people, and prepared to leave immediately. Nie Tian, Feng Qi. Just as they were about to turn around and leave, a familiar voice rang out. "Huang Fu Hong." Nie Tian and Feng Qi turned at the same time and shouted the person's name. Huang Fu Hong's figure flew over, very excited. Nie Tian's gaze was fixed on Huang Fu Hong. Very quickly, he confirmed that the latter was not a mirror image, and then he relaxed. "Nie Tian, Feng Qi, I finally found you." Huang Fu Hong was very excited, and he directly came to Nie Tian and the others. "There's no time to say more. Let's leave now," Nie Tian said. Then he said to Yin Tianyi, "Lead the way." Then, the four figures moved together and quickly disappeared into the void. Along the way, Huang Fu Hong told them what happened after he came to the Ghost Emperor's tomb. It turned out that he also met mirror image martial artists, but they were all people he did not know. Feng Qi explained the matter of the mirror image, and Huang Fu Hong's face was filled with shock. About half an hour later, under Yin Tianyi's lead, Nie Tian and the others arrived outside a huge valley. "The girl you are looking for is in this valley." Yin Tianyi pointed at the valley in front of them and said with some fear. "Huh!" Nie Tian felt that the valley in front of him was a little strange, and he could not help but frown. Then, he took a step forward and came to a place 1,000 meters away from the valley. He spread out his divine sense and tried to sense it. Boom! But at this moment, he suddenly felt a very terrifying mental strength descend, directly attacking his divine sense. In an instant, Nie Tian felt a terrifying mental deterrence, making his divine sense almost collapse. He hurriedly withdrew his divine sense, and his forehead was already dripping with cold sweat. His face was horrified. "Nie Tian, are you all right?" Feng Qi walked over and asked nervously when he saw Nie Tian's reaction. Nie Tian took a deep breath, calmed down, and waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. Fortunately, he had withdrawn his divine sense in time. Otherwise, that frightening mental energy would have crushed his divine sense. "This valley is strange." Nie Tian frowned, looked at the valley in front of him, and said solemnly. Then, he turned to look at Yin Tianyi and asked, "Yin Tianyi, are you sure Jun Aoqing is in the valley?" "Yes." Yin Tianyi nodded heavily and said, I saw her enter the valley with my own eyes. And? Nie Tion's brows furrowed, his expression incomparably somber as he asked, "Speak clearly, what's going on?" In Tienni's eyes flickered incessantly, clearly hiding something. In Tienni's eyes constricted, knowing that he could not hide it anymore, and could only tell the truth. It turned out that In Tienni encountered Jun Aoqing not long after coming to the Ghost Emperor Remnant. He knew that Jun Aoqing had a close relationship with Nie Tian and the rest, so he wanted to kill her. But Jun Aoqing's movement technique was strange and escaped from his hands. He chased all the way and saw Jun Aoqing enter the valley in front of him. He originally wanted to enter the valley too, but he was blocked by a terrifying force, and was even almost killed by that force. So when In Tienni came to this valley again at this time, he was very terrified. Nie Tian finished listening to In Tienni's words. His expression was incomparably somber. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for In Tienni to lie. But Nie Tian could not understand why Jun Aoqing could enter the valley easily, but In Tienni could not? Nie Tian, there's indeed something wrong with this valley. Feng Qi seemed to have noticed something at this time, and said with a tight frown. Nie Tian looked at the valley, thought for a moment and said, "You guys wait for me here, I'll go try." "You have to be careful," Feng Qi reminded Nie Tian. He kept feeling that this stretch of valley was enveloped by a strange force, very sinister. "Nie Tian, there's something wrong with this valley, you have to be careful." And right at this time, Fat Cat's voice also sounded out, reminding Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded his head, and could not help but be somewhat nervous. Fat Cat did not say too much, clearly not seeing the real problem yet. Just what was so strange about this valley? Then, Nie Tian approached step by step, paying attention to everywhere. Every step was cautious, and did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. As he got closer to the valley bit by bit, Nie Tian increasingly felt that there seemed to be an evil force surging in the space, and it was extremely strange. That evil force made him feel an invisible pressure, but when he tried to sense it carefully, the evil force disappeared. After a few minutes, Nie Tian walked to a place about 100 meters away from the valley. At this time, he felt the pressure around his body was very terrifying, as if there was an invisible giant hand holding him tightly, making him unable to breathe. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and then took a step out. Boom! At this time, there was a sudden fluctuation in the void, and then an invisible force appeared, enveloping the entire valley. In the sky above the valley, a strange scene appeared. Chapter 26-29. Chapter 26-29. Chapter 26-29 Spatial Enchantment. Nie Tian's eyes widened as he was taken aback by the sudden change. Although he had been careful, he did not expect something like this to happen. Above the valley, the giant blood-colored hand covered the entire valley. Heaven and earth turned red and the air was filled with a bloody smell. At the same time, Nie Tian felt an invisible giant hand wrapping around him, making it difficult for him to move. He couldn't even move an inch. In the distance, Feng Qi and the others stared blankly at the giant blood-colored hand in the sky. Their faces were filled with shock, and they did not know what to say. The unforeseen event in front of them was something that no one had expected. Nie Tian, are you okay? Feng Qi shouted after a few seconds and was about to rush over. Don't come near me. Nie Tian growled and shouted, Don't come near me. Feng Qi was so scared that he did not dare to go near the valley. He did not know what was going on and was afraid that he would accidentally trigger something and cause Nie Tian to die on the spot. Nie Tian, retreat. At that moment, Fat Cat's voice was heard. It seemed to have discovered something and it said in shock. Nie Tian nodded, took a deep breath and was ready to retreat. However, his body was surrounded by an invisible force. His feet felt like they were filled with lead sand, and he could not move at all. He did not dare to be careless. He carefully released his star energy to fight against the invisible force around him. Retreat. But suddenly, little Fat Cat let out a strange cry, extremely panicked. Boom! Nietion's eyes narrowed. He did not hesitate, and the star energy in his body surged out to fight against the pressure around him. Boom! At this moment, the void suddenly shook. Whoosh! In the next moment, a blood-colored blade suddenly appeared out of thin air and slashed directly towards Nietion. The blood-colored blade was not strong. It was only a few meters long. However, its murderous aura was terrifying. It seemed like it could tear everything apart. Cold. In the blink of an eye, Nietion felt a bone-piercing coldness, which caused his pupils to tremble violently. He was incomparably shocked. The aura of death was so real that it was almost suffocating. Break. At the moment of life and death, Nietion let out a roar. The invisible force in the air finally loosened. He took a few steps back. Whoosh! At that moment, the blood-colored blade whizzed past, almost brushing past Nietion's chest with incomparable sharpness. Puff, puff, puff. The blood-colored blade was like an arrow piercing through the air, directly piercing through countless boulders and giant trees. Everywhere it passed, the boulders and giant trees were all shattered. On the ground, a bottomless ravine appeared. It was actually forcefully created by the bloody aura. Hiss! Feng Qi and the others sucked in a breath of cold air at the sight of this, their faces filled with extreme shock. That seemingly unremarkable blood-colored blade was actually so powerful. It was unimaginable. Outside the valley, Nietion stabilized his body. His face was as pale as a piece of paper. A bloody wound could be seen on his chest. Although the blood-colored blade didn't hit him, the sharp aura tore open a bloody wound on his chest. Nietion was a powerful cultivator, yet he was injured by the blood-colored blade. It was enough to show how powerful the blade was. That was close. After a while, Nietion calmed down and said with a frightened expression, "Luckily, he had broken free from the force in time. Otherwise, he would have died if he had been hit by the blood-colored blade." The blood-colored blade was too terrifying. Its sharp aura was terrifying. Huh! At that instant, Nietion suddenly realized that the invisible force surrounding him had disappeared. He could not help but exclaim in surprise. However, the giant blood-colored hand that was suspended above the valley was still there, releasing a bloody aura in all directions. Fat, what happened just now? Nietion became cold. He took a few steps back and asked in a deep voice. Fortunately, Fat Cat had reminded him in time. Otherwise, Nietion would have been a corpse. Fat Cat seemed to have discovered something. His expression was very frightened. Nietion, I sensed a terrifying aura in the valley. It was extremely terrifying. Fat Cat's expression became better. That blood-colored blade came from the terrifying aura in the valley. What aura was that? Nietion's eyes narrowed and he frowned. I'm not sure. Fat Cat shook his head and said, it seemed to be some kind of formation or some kind of bloodline power. It was a very strange aura. As he spoke, Fat Cat's expression became strange again. He seemed to be hesitating about something. Little Fatty, what else did you discover? Nietion saw the strange expression on Little Fatty's face, and his eyes narrowed as he asked anxiously. I sensed June's aura. Fat Cat frowned and said in a deep voice. June ouching. Nietion's eyes trembled. He exclaimed in his heart, you really are in the valley. Since Fat Cat sensed June ouching's aura, it undoubtedly meant that the latter was in the valley. It seemed that Yin Tianyi was not lying. Nietion, I'm afraid it won't be easy for you to save June ouching. Fat Cat's expression darkened. I sense that June ouching is being controlled by a force. I'm afraid she's in danger. Nietion's eyes narrowed and his face darkened when he heard Fat Cat's words. Fat, I must enter the valley. Nietion roared and took a step forward. However, right at that moment, he was bounced back by a burst of power. Nietion was stunned. He looked in front of him in confusion. There was nothing there. "What's going on?" he exclaimed and tried to touch the area in front of him. His palm came into contact with an invisible force. It was extremely hard, like an invisible boulder lying in front of him. "It's a space barrier," Fat Cat said in a deep voice. Nye Tian was taken aback. Then, he touched the invisible barrier with his hand, his face filled with shock. He finally realized that the entire valley was actually enveloped by an enormous spatial barrier. This space barrier was like an invisible wall that separated the valley from the outside world. Just now, this spatial barrier didn't exist. It seemed that Nye Tian had accidentally touched something, causing this spatial barrier to appear. "Nye Tian, if you want to enter the valley, you must break this space barrier first," Fat Cat said with a frown. She knew that Nye Tian was very anxious. "Okay." Nye Tian nodded. Then, a ball of flame appeared in his hand. It was the space boundary. It instantly condensed into a flame blade and cut the space barrier in front of him. The space boundary could create spacetime, which was extremely destructive to space barriers. In the past, Nye Tian had used the space blade to break the spacetime vortex. But this time, the result surprised him greatly. Bang! The space blade formed by the space boundary touched the space barrier. It made a dull sound as if it had hit an indestructible iron plate. "Huh!" Nye Tian frowned and then exerted force.